Welcome to Potter Read. Today's adventure. Harry saved a Goblin Heir from Death Eaters at age 5 and Gringotts swore its vaults to him. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The Rescue. The boy in the cupboard under the stairs had learned to listen before he learned to read. He knew the house by its noises. The kettle's rising scream meant Aunt Petunia was awake. The triple thud overhead meant Dudley had thrown himself out of bed and would want feeding before he wanted anything else. The particular creak of the fourth stair meant someone was coming down, and Harry Potter, who was 5 years old that summer and small even for 5, had taught himself to be very still when the fourth stair spoke. This morning it spoke twice, which meant Uncle Vernon, who weighed enough for 2. "Up," said the voice through the slats, and the latch rattled. "We're going out. Petunia won't have you in the house unwatched. God knows what you do to it." Harry was already dressed. He slept dressed, in Dudley's outgrown clothes that hung off him like a tent off a fence post, because a boy who slept dressed could be out of the cupboard and useful in the time it took a slower boy to find his shoes. He climbed into the hall and blinked in the brightness and said nothing, because saying things was how you got the cupboard for a day instead of a night. He had worked the rules of the house out the way another child might work out a game. There was a logic to the Dursleys, and Harry had cracked it young: be useful, be silent, be unsurprising. The trouble was the fourth rule, the one nobody had told him and the one he kept breaking by accident: be ordinary. Harry was not ordinary, and the proof of it kept happening to him at the worst times. The teacher's wig had gone blue in front of the whole class. The horrible brown jumper had shrunk to the size of a glove rather than go over his head. There had been a roof and tiles and the certainty of Dudley's fist, and then somehow Harry on the roof and Dudley's gang staring up with their mouths open. Each time something in him had wanted a thing very hard and the world had bent to give it. Each time he had been punished for it as though he had chosen it. He had stopped trying to explain. Explanations, he had found, were just more things to be punished for. Harry sat in the back with his knees together and watched Surrey slide by the window, the identical houses with their identical hedges, and then the houses thinned and the hedges grew tall and old and the road narrowed to a lane between fields. Dudley had a comic in a bag of toffees and the toffees made a wet, busy sound. Aunt Petunia was talking about a garden center and a woman named Yvonne, and a terrible thing that Yvonne had said about another woman's conservatory. Harry was not listening to that. He was watching a man on the verge. The man stood where the lane met an older track, the kind that went off into trees and didn't come back to anywhere the car was going. He wore a long coat in July. That was the first thing. The second thing was that he watched the trees the way a cat watches a hole in a wall, with his whole body pointed at it and his face doing nothing at all. The car passed him at 30 miles an hour and the man did not so much as glance at it, and Harry, who had spent his whole short life learning the difference between a grown-up who would hurt you and one who merely might, felt the back of his neck go cold. Then the trees swallowed the man and the car came to the garden center, and Harry was made to wait by the car park hedge while the Dursleys went in to argue about hanging baskets. "You stay," Uncle Vernon said, a finger like a sausage held an inch from Harry's nose. "You touch nothing, you speak to no one. If you've moved when we come out, you'll wish you hadn't." Then the glass doors swallowed them too, and Harry was alone at the edge of a car park with the sun on the backs of his hands and a coldness on his neck that would not go. He should have stayed. He knew that even as he didn't. But the track and the trees were a quarter-mile back down the lane, and the man in the long coat in July was the most interesting and the most frightening thing Harry had seen in a year of gray mornings, and a boy who has been taught that he is worth nothing carries, hidden inside that lesson, a terrible freedom. Nobody is watching what becomes of him. Harry slipped through the gap in the hedge and went back down the lane toward the trees, keeping to the ditch, moving as he had passed Dudley's gang in the schoolyard, the gate that did not get you seen. He heard it before he saw it, a sound like a wet branch breaking, but too clean, too final, and under it a high voice not speaking English. Then a flash through the trees, green, so green it left a smear in the air after it went, and Harry dropped flat in the long grass at the edge of the track and stopped breathing. There were 4 of them in the clearing, and 2 of them were not human, and Harry's mind did the thing it always did, which was to stop being frightened and start being precise. The 2 that weren't human were shorter than Harry, with long fingers and longer faces and skin the color of old pennies. One of them was down. It lay across a root with a stillness Harry recognized, because he had once watched a cat die under a hedge, and it had had exactly that stillness, the stillness of a thing whose business is finished. The other stood over the fallen one with its back to a bank of earth and a knife in each hand, bleeding from a gash above one eye, and it was very young. Harry could not have said how he knew it was young. He knew it as he knew Dudley was young and Aunt Petunia was not, by something under the face. And were the ones in long coats. When Harry had seen on the verge, the other 2 he had not. They stood in a loose arc around the young creature with the knives, and they were taking their time, and the taking of their time was the worst thing in the clearing, worse than the green flash, worse than the still body on the root. "It can't apparate," said one of the men, the broad one. He had a flat face and small eyes, and he sounded bored, and the boredom was a performance because his wand never wavered. "Wards are up." You felt them go up. It's a courier, Thorn, it's carrying. Then it can hand over what it carries. The one called Thorn was thin and pale, and he spoke softly, and he was the one who frightened Harry most, because Thorn's voice had nothing in it at all. Not anger, not greed. He spoke to the bleeding young creature the way you might speak to a stuck drawer. Give it to me, Goblin, and I will make it quick. You've seen the alternative. He tipped his head toward the body on the root. Your minder was slow. Be quicker, the young goblin, and Harry had the word now, from a picture book Dudley had once torn up. Goblins guarding gold under a mountain, said something short and vicious in its own language, and turned one knife so the edge caught the light. The third man laughed. He was older, with gray in his beard, and he stood a half step back from the others and watched their backs as much as the goblin, and Harry understood without being told that this one was in charge. It won't give it up, the man said. Gornuk blood, they'd let you flay them. Thorn, take the hand. The token will be in the satchel either way, and a one-handed heir is still an heir worth ransoming. Heir, token, ransoming. Harry lay in the grass, and the words went into him and arranged themselves, and around the words his body had gone very calm, the calm that came over him in the half-second before Uncle Vernon's hand landed, the calm that was not peace but its opposite, wounds so tight it had stopped moving. Thorn raised his wand. Harry had no plan. People would say later, in the deep halls under London where the candles burn green gold and the floor is older than England, that the human child had a plan, that he had weighed the lives in the clearing and chosen. They would lay it into the long iron memory of the nation that way, because the nation needed its oaths clean, and a clean oath has a clean beginning. But there was no plan. There was a boy of 5 in the grass, and a thin man with a wand, and a child smaller than himself about to lose a hand or a life, and the thing that had always lived in Harry, the thing that had cracked the school roof tiles and turned the wig blue and made the glass at the zoo go away, that thing came up out of him all at once and without his asking, because Harry wanted, with the whole flat furnace of him, for the wand to stop. The wand stopped. It was not subtle. There are children whose accidental magic is a flicker, a guttering, a thing the ministry barely logs. Harry's was not that and had never been that. The air in the clearing folded. The grass lay flat in a ring as if a great invisible weight had dropped and bounced, and a sound went through the trees that was not loud so much as total, a single colorless whump that took the birds off every branch at once. Thorn's wand was in his hand, and then it was 40 feet up in the leaves, and Thorn himself went off his feet and into the earth bank with the boneless suddenness of a coat falling off a hook. The broad man staggered. The gray-bearded man was already turning, already bringing his wand around, already looking for the source, and the source was a tangle-haired boy in clothes 3 sizes too big, rising out of the long grass with his heart going like a bird in a fist, having done a thing grown wizards trained for years to do and could not. For one whole second nobody moved. Then Harry ran, not away, which is what the old man expected, which is where the wand was already swinging. Harry ran into the clearing, low and fast, and at an angle, the schoolyard angle, the one that took you under the swing of the bigger boy's arm. He hit the young goblin not as an attacker, but as a falling weight, an arm around the narrow shoulders. His whole momentum bent toward the dark mouth of the track behind the earth bank, and he said the only useful thing in his head, "Down there, come on down there." The goblin, to its eternal credit, did not waste the gift. Wounded, half-blind with its own blood, it understood in an instant what a grown human might have argued with for 3, that the impossible child had bought at a doorway, and the doorway was closing. It went with Harry into the track, into the trees, into the green dark. Behind them, the old man's voice cracked across the clearing like a whip. Find it. Both of them, find them now, and the bored, flat-faced one swore, and the air filled with the hiss and crack of curses going into the undergrowth, blind, furious, too many at once. Harry had one advantage, and he knew exactly what it was, because Harry had spent 5 years being hunted through gardens and corridors, and the long grass behind the school by a boy twice his size and a gang who thought it sport. He knew how to be small in a wood. The men were grown, and the men were angry, and angry grown men in a wood go straight and they go loud, and they expect the thing they chase to flee in a straight line away from them, because that is what frightened things do. Harry did not flee in a straight line. He pulled the goblin sideways off the track entirely, into a stand of bramble that would tear a grown man's coat and barely brush a boy of 5, and he pushed them both down flat into the leaf mold under the thorns, put his hand over the goblin's bleeding mouth without thinking, and went still. The goblin understood that too. It went still under his hand, knives still out, eyes black, clever, very old in that young face, fixed on Harry's with an expression Harry had never once in his life received from a grown-up, the expression of someone deciding to trust you. The men crashed past, not 6 feet away. The broad one went straight down the track, as Harry had bet he would, throwing a curse ahead of himself every few steps so the green and red light strobed through the brambles and laid black bars of shadow across the goblin's penny-colored face. The thin one, Thorn, came after, limping, and he was not loud. That was the danger. Thorn had stopped going straight. Thorn was casting along the ground, low, a thin questing thread of pale light that ran through the leaf litter like water seeking a crack, and Harry felt it before he saw it, felt the wrongness of it sliding toward the bramble, and he understood with the cold clarity that was his whole inheritance that this was a thing which found you whether you were hidden or not. So Harry did the second impossible thing of the morning, and this one he meant. He reached out not with his hand but with the part of him that had folded the air, and he took hold of the questing thread of light the way you might pinch a tap of water shut, and he pinched. It was nothing he had been taught. It was the wanting again, narrowed to a needle. He wanted the seeking light to find nothing, to slide past, to die, and the thread guttered and frayed and came apart in the leaf mold a yard from the brambles, and Thorn stopped. Harry felt him stop. Felt the thin man's attention swing, slow and terrible, toward the place where his spell had failed. In the dark under the thorns, the young goblin's hand closed over Harry's wrist, hard, a warning and a question both. Do we run? And Harry, who had no plan, who had only ever had the furnace and the calm and the cunning, shook his head once. Not yet. You run when the bigger boy is sure. You don't run when he's only looking. Thorn cast again, wider this time, a net of the pale thread spreading low across the whole stand of bramble, and Harry knew at once he could not pinch a net as he had pinched a thread. There was too much of it, so he did not try to kill it. He did the other thing, the thing he understood without words. He made the net find something. He wanted with the needle of his will for there to be two warm shapes 30 feet to the left, away down the slope where a badger set broke the ground, and the leaf litter there stirred, and the pale net pooled toward it and brightened, and Thorn turned that way and limped that way and was gone after a warmth that had never been there at all. Harry let the breath out of himself 1 inch at a time, and then the wood behind them lit up like the inside of a furnace. It was not the men's magic. It came from the track, from the direction of the clearing, and it was gold, not the sick green of the killing light, not the red of the others, but a deep beaten gold like the heart of a forge, and it came with a sound like a bell rung once under water, vast and low. Through the brambles Harry saw shapes moving against it, more goblins, but not young, not couriers. These were broad and armored, and they moved in a wedge, and the one at the point of the wedge carried a blade as long as Harry was tall, and the blade was singing. The men did not stay to learn what the gold meant. The old man's voice came again from the clearing, and now it was not commanding but calling a retreat, 2 short, ugly syllables, and there came a sound Harry would learn was the sound of men folding space to escape through it, 3 flat cracks like a starting pistol fired into a pillow. When the gold light steadied and the singing blade swept the clearing, the men were gone. The thin one, the broad one, the gray-bearded one who had given the orders. Gone, and the wood was full of armored goblins and the smell of scorched leaf mold, and on the root where it had fallen, the still body of the one who had been called the Minder. Harry lay under the brambles with his hand still over the young goblin's mouth and discovered he could not move, not from fear. The furnace had gone out all at once, as it always did, leaving him hollowed and shaking and stupid, and he became aware of the brambles in his skin and the cold sweat down his back and the fact that he was a very small boy a very long way from a car park where soon a man with a finger like a sausage would notice he was not where he had been left. The young goblin took Harry's hand gently off its mouth. "They're ours," it said in English, rough and accented and low. Its black eyes held Harry's. "You can let go, they're ours." Harry let go. What happened next happened fast, and Harry remembered it afterward in pieces, the way you remember the few minutes after you've been hit hard. The brambles being parted, not torn, by armored hands that were careful with him in a way no hand had ever been careful with him. The young goblin standing, swaying, refusing to be carried, snapping something fierce and goblin at the armored ones who reached for it. A great cloak put around Harry's shoulders, far too big, smelling of metal and smoke and stone. Then the wedge of goblins parting, and the one with the singing blade coming through them, and crouching down all the way down until his scarred and ancient face was level with the face of a 5-year-old. He was the most frightening thing Harry had seen all morning, and Harry was not frightened of him at all, which was its own kind of strange. The goblin's face was a map of old wars. One eye was milk-white and dead in its socket, the other was black and wet and fixed on Harry with an intensity that should have been unbearable. There were rings of beaten iron in his ears and a chain of them across the breast of his armor, and when he spoke his voice came up out of his chest like something dragged over gravel. "You are not of the Wand folk's house," he said. It was not a question, but Harry understood he was meant to answer. "I don't know what that means," Harry said. His own voice came out small and steady, and the steadiness surprised him. "I was in the grass. I saw the man going to hurt him." He looked once at the young goblin standing fierce and swaying in the ring of armor. "So I made the man stop." Something went through the clearing at that, not a sound exactly. A change of pressure, as if every goblin present had drawn breath at once and not let it out. The young one's black eyes had gone very wide. Old Warrior's dead white eye and his living black one both held on Harry. "You made him stop," he repeated, and there was a terrible care in how he said it, as if he were laying each word on a scale. The wand flew. The seeking spell broke in the leaves and broke again and chased a warmth that was not there. A human child with no wand threw down the cursebreaker thorn and turned his hunting against him, then hid the air of a directing line under a thorn bush and outthought 3 trained killers of the wand folk. At 5 years of age, he leaned closer. The forge stone smell of him filled Harry's whole world. Do you know what you have done, manling? No, Harry said honestly. For the first time, the old goblin's ruined face moved into something almost like a smile, and it was the most alarming thing yet because it was tender. No, he agreed. You do not. You will. The whole of the mountain will teach you before the end. He reached out one scarred hand and set it on Harry's tangled head with a gentleness that did not match a single other thing about him. I am Bargrok, Blade Warden of the Deep Gate. That one you saved is Krenok, heir of the Gornuk line, which is one of the 7 that direct the nation. By every law written in iron under the mountain, you have done a thing tonight that the Wand folk's law has no words for, and ours has too many. The black eye glittered. What is your name, manling? And the boy under the borrowed cloak, who had been told 10,000 times that his name was Boy, or Freak, or you, looked up into the one living eye of the Blade Warden of the Deep Gate and said, Harry. Behind Bargrok, the young goblin Krenok pulled himself up out of the hands that wanted to hold him, blood drying down the side of his fierce young face, and said in a voice that cracked on the word Harry, as if learning it, as if it were a word that mattered. As if somewhere far below them under stone the boy had never seen, a great ledger had opened to a fresh page, and a name was about to be written in it that would not be unwritten while the mountain stood. But that was below, and that was later. Up here in the green dark there was only the clearing, and the dead courier on the route that the armored goblins were already lifting with a care Harry had not known the dead could be given, and the cloak too big for him, and the smell of metal and smoke and stone, and a 5-year-old boy who had run toward the green light instead of away from it and could not yet imagine what running toward it would cost him or buy him. Harry, Bargrok said, testing it, weighing it, finding it sound. We earn your debt, Harry, in a way you cannot understand and we cannot ignore. He rose to his full height, which was not tall, and yet the whole clearing seemed to organize itself around him as he rose. And the nation pays its debts. The car park when they brought him back to it, and they did bring him back, 2 of the armored ones walking him to the edge of the trees while the rest of the world went on not knowing anything had happened in it, was exactly as he had left it. The hedge, the sun. The glass doors of the garden center with their posters about bedding plants. Harry stood at the gap in the hedge in clothes that had bramble tears now to go with the bagginess, and one of the goblins, broad and silent, crouched to look him in the eye. You will tell them nothing, the goblin said. It was not a threat, it was instruction, the kind you give to someone you have decided is worth instructing, not because we ask it. Because they would not believe you, and a thing not believed becomes a lie in the mouth of a child, and you have not lied today. Do not start. It pressed something into Harry's palm and closed his fingers over it. When you are alone, not before. The thing in his hand was cold and heavy for its size, and Harry did not open his fingers. Will I see him again? Harry asked. He meant Krenok. He had not decided to ask it. Came out of him the way the magic had from a place he didn't govern. The broad goblin looked at him for a moment, and there was something in the flat black eyes that Harry was too young to name but would, in years to come, recognize as grief and hope braided together. Manling, it said, you will not be able to get rid of him. Then it stood, stepped back through the gap in the hedge, and was simply not there anymore, and Harry was alone in a car park in Surrey holding something cold in his fist. He opened his hand only once in the car, when Dudley was asleep against the window and Aunt Petunia was talking again about Yvonne, and the conservatory and Uncle Vernon was grinding through the gears, and nobody, as ever, was watching the boy in the back. It was a coin, or it had the shape of a coin. Black iron worn smooth, and on one face it carried a mark Harry didn't know, a tower split by a single line, and on the other a row of notches like the teeth of a key. It was warm now from his hand, and when he turned it the notches caught the passing streetlights one by one, and Harry, 5 years old, bramble-torn, hollow with the aftermath of magic, felt the strangest thing he had felt all day, stranger than the green light, stranger than the gold. He felt that he was not, for the first time in his memory, entirely alone in the world. He closed his fist over the iron coin and put his fist in his pocket and looked out at the dark fields going by, and behind his still face the precise and watchful machine of his mind turned over the words he had heard in the clearing, air, and directing line, and the nation pays its debts, and began, with nothing but the furnace and the calm and the cunning that had kept him alive, to wonder what they would buy. 60 miles north, in a farmhouse that did not appear on any ministry register because the man who owned it had murdered the family who did, 3 failures sat around a table and tried to decide whose fault the morning had been. A child, said Mulciber, the broad one. He had a tumbler of someone else's whiskey and a temper he was barely keeping in the glass. We had the Gornuk whelp boxed, we had its minder dead. We had the token a hand's grab away, and we lost it to a child in a jumper 4 sizes too big. I felt that burst. That was no 5-year-old's accident, Cassius. That was a discharge that would have put a trained man on his back. Who is he? The gray-bearded man at the head of the table did not answer at once. Cassius Rookwood had learned patience in a place his uncle Augustus had described to him before the Dementors took the old man's mind, the Department of Mysteries, where the unhurried always outlive the clever, and he turned his wand over in his fingers and looked at the failure squarely, because a failure looked at squarely is the only kind that teaches you anything. That is the correct question, he said, and it is not the one that will keep us alive. The one that will keep us alive is this. He set the wand down. The blade guard of the deep gate came through a courier stone in full array for a single wounded heir. Do you understand what that means? Bargrok does not leave the mountain. He has not left it in 40 years. The nation sent its sharpest blade to the surface for a Gornuk child, which tells me the token that child carried is no courier's trinket. It is a reckoning token. And a reckoning token in transit means the 7 lines are moving gold in a quantity that has not moved since the last war. He let it settle into the room. There's a great deal of money about to be in motion under London, gentlemen, old money, war money, and we will need every nut of it because the Dark Lord did not die at Godric's Hollow, whatever the fools at the ministry sing into their cups, and when he returns he will not reward the men who spent 13 years hiding. He will reward the men who built him a war chest while he was gone. Thorne spoke from the corner where he had been icing the shoulder Harry had driven into an earth bank. His voice had nothing in it as ever, but his pale eyes had a new and fixed attention. And the child is a loose thread the goblins have picked up. That is all he can be. They will use him and discard him because that is what the gold grubbers do with wand folk who blunder into their affairs. Rookwood retrieved his wand. But find out his name. A discharge like the one you felt does not come from nothing. Blood like that has a family, and a family has a house, and a house, he smiled, and it did not reach his eyes, a house can always be visited. We do not move on the mountain, we are not mad, but the surface is ours, and sooner or later everything the goblins value has to come up into the light to be spent. We will be patient, we will be there when it does. He did not know the child's name. It would take Cassius Rookwood the better part of a decade to learn it, and by the time he did, the loose thread he had dismissed would have become a knot the size of a fist around the throat of everything he was building. But that was later. That night there was only the unregistered farmhouse, 3 failures, and a patient man deciding that patience would be enough. They came for Harry 11 days later. He had counted the days. He counted everything. It was a way of holding still inside a life that gave him nothing else to hold. 11 mornings of the kettle and the 4th stare and Dudley's wet busy chewing, and on the 11th night late, when the house had gone dark and Uncle Vernon's snore came through the ceiling like a saw through a log, the iron coin in Harry's fist grew warmer. He had taken to sleeping with it, the one warm thing in the cupboard. It grew hot. Then it hummed a single low note he felt in the bones of his hand, and a line of gold light traced itself out from under the cupboard door across the dusty hall floor and stopped and waited. Harry was already dressed. He opened the cupboard door. The hall was full of a soft gold light that came from nowhere, and standing in it, no taller than Harry, dressed not in armor now, but in a coat of dark stuff sewn with thread that caught the light like wire, was a goblin he had not seen before. This one was old in a different way than Bargrok, not war-scarred but ink-stained, with spectacles of beaten gold pushed up a long nose and a leather case under one arm thick with rolled documents, and an expression of weary intelligence that took in the cupboard, the latch on the outside of the cupboard door, the thinness of the boy who slept behind it, and the whole sleeping, ordinary cruelty of the house in one slow, black-eyed sweep, and gave away nothing. "Harry Potter," the goblin said very quietly so as not to wake the saw upstairs. "My name is Nagnok. The nation calls me the Reckoner because counting is what I do, and there is a counting to be done that concerns you, and it cannot be done in this." The black eyes touched the latch one more time, and something cold and final settled behind them. "House. Am I in trouble?" Harry asked. It was the question that organized his whole life, and he asked it without fear, only to know. "No," said Nagnok the Reckoner, and for the first time his weary face shifted into something that was not a smile but was kin to one. "No, child, for the first time in your short and badly kept life you are exactly the opposite of in trouble. The heir of the Gornuk line owes you his life, which is a debt the nation must answer, and the nation has chosen how to answer it, and the answer is large." He held out one ink-stained hand. "I am here to take you somewhere it can be explained to you properly with all its weight, because you are owed the truth of it, and because," the black eyes flicked once, almost amused, almost grim, "you are the sort who will want to read the contract before he signs, even at 5, especially at 5. Will you come?" Harry looked at the offered hand. He looked at the dark stairs and the sleeping house and the cupboard with the latch on the outside that had been the whole size of his world. He thought of the green light and the gold light and the warrior who had crouched all the way down to put his face level with a boy's, and the young goblin who had decided under the brambles to trust him, and the broad one in the car park who had said you will not be able to get rid of him. He put his hand in Nagnok's. "Yes," he said. The gold light folded up around them both like a closing hand. The cupboard under the stairs, when Aunt Petunia wrenched it open the next morning shrieking about unswept floors, was empty and would stay empty, and the boy who had been kept in it was gone into the deep places of the world, where the candles burn green gold and the floor is older than England, to be told exactly what his reckless nerve in a Surrey clearing had purchased, and to begin to learn the terrible and splendid arithmetic of what it would cost. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The Oath. The gold light let them out 1,000 feet under London. Harry had expected a bank. He had seen a bank once on the high street, all marble and brass and a queue. This was not that. The gold folded away from around him, and he stood on a floor of black stone polished by so many centuries of feet that it held the light like deep water, and the ceiling was so far above that it had its own weather, a faint mist that the green gold candle flames lit from below. The hall ran away into the dark in both directions, vast as a cathedral laid on its side, and every surface that was not stone was iron, and every surface that was not iron was gold, and none of it was for show. Harry understood that at once, with an instinct older than his words. The wan folks' bank upstairs was a face. This was the thing behind the face. Nagnock had not let go of his hand. It frightens most of your kind, the reckoner said, watching him. The depth of it, the age. It's quiet, Harry said. It was the truest thing he could say. There was no shouting here, no kettle, no fourth stair. The quiet had a weight to it that was not the held breath quiet of the cupboard. It was the quiet of a place that had nothing to prove. I like it. Something moved behind Nagnock's spectacles. Yes, he said, I rather thought you might. They walked. Harry's footsteps and Nagnock's made no echo. The black stone drank sound. Goblins passed them, going about errands Harry could not read, and every one of them looked at the boy, and not one of them looked at him with the contempt he had spent 5 years learning to expect from the eyes of adults. They looked at him as you look at a thing that has been written into a ledger you have not yet read, curious, weighing, careful. You found the latch, Harry said as they walked. It was not a question. He had seen Nagnock's eyes go to the outside latch on the cupboard door twice, and he had learned long ago that what an adult looked at twice was a thing they intended to do something about. Nagnock did not insult him by pretending. We found a great deal, he said. We are a nation of accountants, Harry Potter. When a debt is owed, we audit the creditor. We learned the name of the boy who saved the heir of the Gornock line, and then we learned how that boy was kept, and the second thing made the first thing worse, not better, in the reckoning of the nation. You understand me? No. Good. An honest no is worth more than a clever yes. The reckoner stopped at the foot of a stair that went up into the green light and turned to face him, and for a moment the weariness lifted off his ancient face and something fierce looked out from under it. Then I will say it once plainly so that you carry it through the doors above us. The wan folk left you in a cupboard. They are about to discover that the thing they threw away has been picked up by the only power in this island they have never been able to rob, intimidate, or rule. That is not your doing, and it is not your fault, and you need not thank anyone for it, but it is true, and the truth is yours now, and you will need it. He turned and began to climb. Come. The 7 are waiting, and the 7 do not like to wait, and that is the only thing in the world they have in common. The hall of the reckoning was not large. That surprised Harry most of all. After the cathedral dark of the deep gate, he had expected the place of the nation's power to be vast, and instead it was a round chamber no bigger than the Dursleys' lounge, carved from a single piece of white stone shot through with veins of gold, and 7 seats stood around its wall, and that was all. No throne raised above the others, 7 seats of equal height, and in them 7 goblins, and Harry understood before anyone spoke that he was looking at the thing that ruled this whole drowned and golden world, not a king with a court but 7 counters at a table, and the table was the world. Bargrock stood against the wall, out of the ring of seats, in his blade warden's iron. When Harry came in, the old warrior's one living eye found him and held, and something passed between them that needed no words, the recognition of 2 people who had been in the same wood when the green light flew. Cranach stood beside the seat to Harry's left, cleaned and bound, a strip of dark cloth across the gash above his eye, and dressed in a coat sewn with the same wire-bright thread as Nagnock's, and he looked for the first time like what he was. Not a wounded courier in a Surrey clearing, but the heir of one of the 7 lines, standing at the right hand of the goblin who sat in the seat his blood would one day claim. When his eyes found Harry across the white chamber, the careful heir's face cracked for half a second into the face of the boy who had decided, under a thorn bush, to trust a stranger, and then it closed again because there were elders watching. The goblin in the seat opposite the door was old past Harry's ability to measure. Where Bargrock was scarred and Nagnock was ink-stained, this one was simply worn as a coin is worn, every edge gone soft with handling, and his eyes were not black like the others, but a pale gold that did not seem to focus on anything in the room and yet missed nothing in it. When he spoke, the white stone took his voice and folded it back doubled, so that he seemed to speak from every wall at once. So this is the manling. This is Harry Potter, director, said Nagnock and bowed, and Harry understood that the worn old goblin in the seat opposite was Ragnock, who the deep places called the king under the mountain, though there was no crown on him and no throne under him, only the oldest seat at the table of the world. Come here, child, Ragnock said, into the center, where we can all reckon you. Harry walked into the middle of the white chamber, and 7 pairs of eyes came onto him, and he stood under them and did not fidget and did not look at his feet, because he had learned in a harder school than this one that looking at your feet was how you taught a room you could be hurt. He looked back. He studied each of the 7 in turn, as he had studied the 4 in the clearing, reading what he could, and when he came back round to Ragnarok, the worn old goblin's pale gold eyes had changed, very slightly, and Harry could not have said how. "He does not look away," said one of the 7, a lean goblin with rings of jade in his ears, and his voice was not kind. "A wan child of 5 does not look 7 directors of the nation in the eye and keep his water. Either he is too witless to know what he stands before, or he is something we have not weighed correctly. I do not like either answer." "Then weigh him again, Vorgin," said Ragnarok without heat. "That is what we are for." He leaned forward in the worn old seat. "Harry Potter, do you know where you are?" "Under the bank," Harry said. "The real one, the part the people upstairs don't see." A stir went round the ring. "And do you know what we are? You're the ones who decide." Harry had worked it out on the walk from the 7 equal seats, from how Nagnok had said the 7 do not like to wait. "There's no king's chair, 7 chairs the same, so no one of you can decide alone. You decide together or it doesn't count." He paused, because a thought had arrived and he had learned to follow his thoughts where they went. "That's why he didn't just give me gold." He looked at Krenok's elder at the seat of the Gornuk line. "A debt this big, you couldn't pay it from one line. You'd all have to agree, that's why I'm here, you're going to vote." The silence that followed had a different quality than the silences before it. "He's 600 years too young to be in this chamber," said the lean Vorgin, "and he has read it in under a minute. I withdraw witless." He sat back. "I do not withdraw concerned." Ragnarok had not taken his pale eyes off Harry. "Yes," the king under the mountain said, "we are going to vote. But before the 7 vote, the 7 must hear the debt spoken in full, so that no line may claim afterward it did not know the weight of what it carried. Krenok of the Gornuk line, you were there, speak the debt." Krenok came forward into the white light and stood beside Harry, and though Krenok was the older of the 2 by years Harry could not count, in the air of a directing line, and Harry was a wan child in clothes that had been washed but still hung wrong off his thin frame, the 2 of them stood the same height, and Harry found that standing together steadied something in him. "I carried the reckoning token of the Gornuk line," Krenok said, and his rough young voice rang clear off the white stone. "From the holdfast at Cairdoon to the deep gate by the surface road, because the underroads were closed for the moving of the war gold and the token had to come ahead of it. My minder was Atreth, who taught me to hold a blade. The wan folk took the surface road from us at the old track in the place the Muggles call Surrey. They killed Atreth with the green word that cannot be blocked. They were 3 and trained, and they wanted the token, and when they could not make me give it, they decided to take my hand and ransom the rest of me to the nation." He stopped. The chamber waited. Harry saw the heir's jaw work once. "I would have lost the hand," Krenok said. "I had decided it. A hand is cheaper than the token, and the token is the lines, and I am only the lines' heir, which is to say I am the lines to spend. I had made the reckoning, and I was ready." His black eyes came round to Harry. And then a muggle-looking child who should not have been able to light a candle threw down the cursebreaker thorn with a discharge that flattened the grass in a ring, and pulled me into the trees, and hid me under a thorn bush with his own hand over my mouth. And when the cursebreaker's seeking spell came for us, the child broke it twice, and sent it chasing a warmth that was not there into a badger's set, while 3 killers of the wand folk hunted us 6 feet away. He did this with no wand, no training, and no reason. He did not know what I was. He did not know there was a token. There was nothing in it for him. Krenok's voice did not rise, but it hardened, and the hardening filled the room. He weighed a stranger's hand against his own safety, and he chose the stranger. At 5 years of age, that is the debt, directors. I owe this child my hand, and the line owes this child its token, and the nation owes this child the heir of the Gornuk line, alive and whole, standing in this chamber instead of bleeding in a wandfolk dungeon. I have spoken the debt in full, reckon it. He stepped back to Harry's side. For a moment no one in the ring spoke. Then a goblin Harry had not yet heard, a heavy-set one with a single iron ring through the bridge of her broad nose, said slowly, "It is a true debt. None here will dispute the debt." She turned her head toward Ragnarok. "We dispute the answer. There is a difference between owing a thing and how a thing is paid, and the Gornuk line has not asked us to pay this in gold. The Gornuk line has asked us to open the old reckoning." She let the words drop into the white chamber like stones into a well. "Say it plainly, Becketh of Gornuk. You are asking the 7 to swear the oath of iron and gold to a human child. There has not been such an oath in 900 years. The last time we swore it to a king, and the king is 9 centuries dust, and the oath is still spending us. And you would swear it to a boy of 5 because he was brave in a wood." "I would swear it," said the elder of the Gornuk line, Becketh. Harry now had the name, and he was old, though not so old as Ragnarok, and his voice shook not with weakness but with the effort of holding something very large very still, "because the law leaves us no smaller door. Speak the law, reckoner. Speak it so the child hears it too, because by the end of this hour the law will be about him, and he is owed the knowing." Nagnok the reckoner came to the center and stood by the 2 boys and opened the leather case under his arm, though Harry saw at once that he did not need to read from it. The reckoner knew the law as Harry knew the noises of the house. He recited it from somewhere under his ink-stained skin. "A life debt," Nagnok said, "is the heaviest coin the nation knows, heavier than gold because gold can be counted and a life cannot. When a goblin saves a goblin, the debt is paid in service and remembered in the rolls. When a wand child saves a goblin, the debt is paid in gold, and the matter is closed because the wand folk are not of the nation, and the nation does not bind itself to outsiders. This is the ordinary law, and under it we would weigh out gold to the boy until the scale read even, and send him back to his cupboard a rich child, and be done. The reckoner's pale spectacles swung slowly around the ring. But there is an older law beneath the ordinary one, written in the iron under the gold, and it speaks to one case the ordinary law cannot hold. When the life that is saved is the life of an heir of one of the 7 directing lines, and the saving is done in the open before witnesses of the nation at risk of the saver's own life, by one who asks nothing and is owed nothing. In that one case, and the rolls record it twice in our whole history, the debt is too heavy for gold. Gold would insult it. In that one case, the nation may open the old reckoning, and answer a life with the only thing it holds that is heavier than gold. He paused. Itself. Harry stood very still in the white light and listened, because he had understood from the first words that this was the contract, and you read the contract before you sign. The oath of iron and gold, said Nagnok, swears 3 things to its holder and binds 3 things upon him, and the swearing and the binding cannot be parted. You cannot take the half you like. Hear the swearing first. He lifted one ink-stained hand and folded down a finger for each. First, the vaults, not a vault, the vaults. The standing credit of the nation is open to its sworn friend, to draw upon as a line draws upon it, under the same accounting and the same limits, which is to say not without measure, for even the 7 cannot spend without measure, but as one of the nation's own. Second, the protection. The arm of the nation is set between its sworn friend and his enemies, on goblin ground and in goblin contract, and an attack upon the sworn friend is reckoned an attack upon the nation, to be answered as the nation answers attacks which the wand folk have 900 years of reason to fear. Third, the teaching. The sworn friend is not left a child holding a sword he cannot lift. The nation opens its disciplines to him, warding, law, reckoning the forge, until he can carry the weight that has been put upon him. For a friend who cannot defend the nation's trust is a debt, not an asset, and the nation does not make itself a creditor of its own oath. He folded the hand closed and opened it again. Now hear the binding, for here is the price, and the child must hear the price before the 7 swear, or the oath is unclean, and I will not record it. The reckoner's pale eyes came down onto Harry, level and absolute. First, the holder of the oath is bound to the honor law of the nation as if he were born under the mountain. He may not lie in a sworn matter, he may not break a sealed contract, he may not betray the nation's trust to the nation's enemies. Second, the binding is for life and cannot be put down. You do not resign from the oath of iron and gold. There is no door out of it but death, yours or the nation's, and the nation does not intend to die. Third, and here even the reckoner's level voice dropped, and the White Chamber leaned in to hear it, the penalty for breaking faith is not a fine, it is not exile. The nation does not punish a sworn friend who turns. The nation collects what it is owed, and what it is owed is everything, and it collects in full. Do you understand the third binding, Harry Potter? I will say it without the soft words. If you ever betray the nation that swears itself to you today, the nation will kill you, and it will be just, and not one voice in this chamber will be raised against it, including in the end your own. That is the price of being trusted by a people who do not trust. That is the oath of iron and gold. The chamber was silent. 7 directors watched a boy of 5 stand in the center of the oldest law under England and reckon whether he would sign it. And Harry, who had read the contract, asked the question no one in the chamber had expected, because it was not the question of a frightened child and it was not the question of a greedy one. Why me and not just the gold, he said. You said the gold would close the debt. The gold's cheaper. The gold doesn't cost you 900 years. So why do the expensive thing? He looked at Beckett of the Gornuk line, then at Krenok beside him, then at Ragnok in the worn old seat. What do you get? It was Ragnok who answered, and the king under the mountain answered slowly, as if each word were a coin laid out on the black stone where all could see its weight. You have asked the only question worth asking, Ragnok said, and I will pay you the courtesy of the true answer, because a sworn friend who is lied to in the swearing is a sword forged with a flaw, and the flaw finds the bone in the end. Here is what we get, Harry Potter. For 900 years the wand folk have looked at the nation and seen a vault with teeth. A thing to be guarded against, robbed when they dare, regulated when they can, and never, never once a thing to be allied with, because we are not wizards and we are not human, and to the wand folk we are not quite people. They take our gold and bar us from their parliament. They make our steel and forbid us their wands. And we have endured it because endurance is also a kind of wealth, and we are patient, and we are still here, and the half of them that wronged us are dust. The pale gold eyes burned now, banked low and very hot. And then a wand child of 5, with no reason and no profit, threw his body over the air of one of our lines because a stranger was going to be hurt. He did the thing 900 years of wand folk have never done. He treated a goblin's life as worth his own. Ragnok sat back. So here is what we get, child. We get to find out what is owed to us when we are treated as people instead of as a vault with teeth. We have been waiting 900 years to find out. You are the first creditor we have ever wished to pay in full. That is what we get." Harry looked at him for a long moment. "All right," he said. Yes, they voted, and it was not a show of hands. Each of the 7 rose in turn and spoke a single word in the old tongue, and Nagnok wrote each word as it was spoken into a roll he held open on his arm, and Harry could not understand the words, but he could read the faces, and he saw that the lean Vorgin of the jade rings hesitated the longest, and that when Vorgin finally spoke his word it was through his teeth, and that the heavy-set Becketh said hers like a blow landing. And that Ragnok spoke last and quietly, and the quiet of it was the loudest thing in the chamber. 7 words, 7 yeses, though one came hard. It was the hard one who found Harry afterward in the antechamber where they sat him while the rolls were sealed, and Vorgin of the jade rings did not pretend to warmth he did not feel. "You will think me your enemy," Vorgin said without preamble, crouching to the boy's level, though it plainly cost his pride to do it. "I am not. I voted yes. But I want you to know why my yes came through my teeth, because a friend who does not understand the doubts of his allies is a fool, and the nation cannot afford a fool inside its oath." His jade rings clicked as he tilted his head. "I have spent 90 years watching the Wanfolk teach their children to despise us, and then watching those children grow into the wizards who write our chains. Every human I have trusted has, in the end, decided that a goblin is a goblin. You are 5. You are clean. But you will grow, manling, and you will grow among them, not among us, because we cannot keep you under the mountain forever, and I have seen what growing among them does. So here is my doubt, and I give it to you plainly as a gift, because the others will only smile at you. The day may come when being our friend costs you something you are not willing to pay, a place, a name, a Wanfolk girl's good opinion, who knows what, and on that day I will be watching to see which way you break. Prove me wrong." "I should like to be wrong. I do not expect it." He rose. "That is all. Carry it." He left. Harry sat with the words and found that he was not angry, because Vorgin had done him the same courtesy Ragnok had, the courtesy of the truth without soft edges. And somewhere under the boy's stillness a resolve set, quiet and hard as quenched iron, that 90 years from now, if he was alive, Vorgin of the jade rings would have to admit he had been wrong. Then came the burning, and the burning was the part Harry would carry in his bones for the rest of his life. They brought him down again, below even the deep gate, to a place where the black stone gave way to raw iron, and the air shook with a heat that came up through the floor, the heart forge of the mountain, where the first goblins had struck the first steel, and where the rolls said, the nation's oldest oaths were not written but made. Bargrok was there in his blade warden's iron, sweat running down his scarred face, and he did not seem to feel the heat. The 7 were there, ranged around a great anvil of black iron worn to a shine, and in the center, glowing the gold of the heart of a forge, lay a bar of iron the length of Harry's forearm. Ragnok lifted it in tongs and held it up so all could see, and the gold of it lit the whole chamber and lit the faces of the 7 and lit the face of the boy. "In the old days," the king under the mountain said, and now his voice had left the dry register of the law entirely and gone somewhere older and vaster, somewhere that lifted the hair on Harry's arms, "we did not write our deepest oaths in ink, for ink can be washed, nor in blood, for blood can be spilled, but in iron, for iron remembers. This bar was struck the night the heir of the Gornuk line came home alive. It has lain in the heart forge since. It is the oath made metal, which to the nation is more lasting than flesh." He turned the glowing bar in the tongs. "We will quench it now. In the quenching it takes the oath into itself, and it does not let go, and it does not forget, and while this bar endures, the oath of iron and gold endures, and the nation's vaults and the nation's arm and the nation's teaching stand sworn to the one whose name is in it. Reckoner, speak the name into the iron." Nagnok the Reckoner stepped to the anvil, laid his ink-stained hand a hand's breadth from the glowing iron, and said, in a voice the heat made enormous, "Harry Potter, friend of the nation, sworn this day to the 7 lines under the mountain, and the 7 lines to him, iron to iron and gold to gold, until the iron forgets, which iron does not." The bar went into the quench trough, and the steam went up the height of the chamber, and out of the steam came a sound, not the hiss of metal in water, but a single bell note, vast and low and gold, the same note Harry had heard come through the trees behind the singing blade, and he understood now what it had been. It was the nation. It was the sound the nation made when it bound itself. It went through the iron floor and up through the bones of his feet and into his chest, and it rang there once and did not entirely stop ringing, and would not, he somehow knew, ever entirely stop for as long as he lived. When the steam cleared, the bar lay black again in the trough, cooling, and on it, raised in the metal as though it had always been there, was a line of marks Harry could not read, and a tower split by one line, the mark from the iron coin in his pocket. It was done. The nation had sworn its vaults and its protection to a boy of 5 who had been kept in a cupboard, and the boy had sworn himself to the nation, and the iron would remember it when everyone now living in the chamber was as dust as the king of 900 years ago. Afterward they let him sleep in a room cut from the white stone with a bed in it that was the first bed Harry had ever had to himself, and the quiet of the deep places lay over him like a blanket, and for once nothing in him was braced for a sound on a stair. Krenak came in before the lamp was put out. He stood in the doorway, the bandage dark across his brow, and for a while neither of them said anything because they were two children and the day had been very large. They will tell it wrong in the rolls, Krenak said at last. They will say you chose, they will say you reckoned the lives and acted, they need it to read clean. He came and sat on the edge of the bed, which was not a thing an heir of a directing line did, sit on the bed of a wan child, and they both knew it, and he did it anyway. But I was under the thorn bush with you, Harry. There was no reckoning in your face. You did not choose me because I was worth choosing. You did not know what I was worth. You chose me because I was going to be hurt and you were close enough to stop it. That is a different thing and a better thing, and I am the only one who knows it because I was the only one close enough to see your face. His black eyes were fierce. So I am going to do a thing the rolls have no line for. The nation owes you its vaults and its arm and its teaching. Those are the nations, but I owe you my hand, and that is mine, not the nation's, and I will not pay it in gold or iron. He put out his arm, the wrist-to-wrist grip of the warriors Harry had seen in the clearing. I claim you kin in debt, Harry Potter, brother by the thorn bush. There is no law for it. I am making the law. Will you take it? Harry looked at the offered arm. He thought of the broad goblin in the car park who had said you will not be able to get rid of him, and understood now that it had not been a warning. He took Krenok's arm wrist to wrist. Yes, he said for the fourth time that day, and this yes was the easiest of them all, and the one he never once regretted. Far above them, in a circular office at the top of a tower in Scotland, a great many delicate silver instruments stood on spindle-legged tables, and one of them, a slender thing of glass and silver that had turned and ticked and breathed out faint puffs of pale smoke without fail for very nearly 5 years, gave a sudden lurch and stuttered, and its smoke guttered from white to a thin and troubled gray. Albus Dumbledore, who had been asleep, was not asleep an instant later. He crossed the room in his nightshirt and stood over the instrument and watched the gray smoke curl, and his face, which the wizarding world thought of as kindly and twinkling, was at that moment neither. The instrument measured the blood ward at a house in Surrey, the ward he had anchored to the boy's living presence under his mother's sister's roof, the ward that was the keystone of 15 years of careful planning. It had never faltered. It was faltering now, not broken but loosening, as a knot loosens when the thing it was tied around is no longer there to hold the tension. "Where have you gone, Harry?" the old wizard said to the empty office very quietly. "And who has taken you?" He did not get an answer that night. But he was patient too, in his way, and thorough, and by morning he had sent the first careful, deniable inquiry down the first careful, deniable channel, and the slow turning of the wizarding establishment toward the boy under the mountain had begun. 1,000 feet above the iron that now held the boy's name and would not let it go. Below, that same night, while 300 miles north, a clever old wizard wrote his first deniable inquiry. The oldest member of the Gornuk line came to the white room where the boy slept and stood in the doorway and watched him. Becketh of Gornuk was old, though not so old as Ragnok, and she was the grandmother of the heir whose life the boy had saved, and she had sat in the seat of her line in the hall of the reckoning and voted the hard vote like a blow landing. And she had not spoken to the wan child once, because the elders of the Gornuk line did not give their hearts to strangers, and a strange wan child who had blundered into the nation's most expensive oath was a stranger twice over. She had voted yes because the law and her own honor and her grandson's life left her no smaller door. She had not voted yes with anything warmer than honor. She had come down to the white room tonight to look at the boy with her own eyes and decide privately for herself what manner of creature the nation had bound itself to, because Becketh of Gornuk trusted the law and trusted Ragnok and trusted, in the end, only what she had reckoned with her own 2 eyes. The boy was not asleep. He had heard the door, he heard everything, this one, even in the dark, even bone-tired. She marked that, and he had gone still in his bed in a manner she knew, because she had seen it in goblin children pulled out of the wan folks' worst camps in the last war. The stillness of a young thing that has learned a door opening in the dark is a thing to survive rather than a thing to welcome. "I am not here to harm you," Becketh said from the doorway, and did not come closer, because a wise old creature does not close on a frightened young one. "I am Becketh of the Gornuk line. The boy you saved is my grandson. I am the eldest of his blood." She studied him in the lamplight. "I voted to swear the nation to you tonight. I want you to know that I did not vote it warmly. I voted it because it was lawful and because it was owed, and I have lived too long and lost too much to the wan folk to give my heart to one of them on the strength of a single brave hour in a wood. I came down here to look at you and decide whether I had voted to bind my grandson's nation to a treasure or to a mistake." The black eyes did not blink. "So I will ask you a thing, and your answer is yours, and there is no law in it and no oath, only an old goblin who buried her son in the last war and does not intend to bury her son's son in the next. The nation has given you its vaults and its arm tonight. What do you want from us, Harry Potter? Now that you know how large the gift is, what is it you mean to take?" It was the question Vorgen had asked sideways and Ragnok had asked of the nation, turned now and asked plainly by a grandmother of a boy of 5 in a bed in the dark, and Harry sat up and looked at the oldest of the Gornuk line and answered it the only way he knew how, which was truly because he was too tired to be anything else and because something in the fierce old face did not permit a lie. "I don't know how to want things," he said. "That's the real answer. I've never had anything, so I never learned how to want it, because wanting things you can't have just hurts, so I stopped." He looked at his hands. "Everyone keeps asking me what I'll take. The director, the lean one with the green rings, you, and I think you're all expecting a number or a thing or a kind of power, and I don't have one because I don't know how to want a number. The only thing I noticed today," he stopped and made himself say it because the old goblin had asked plainly and deserved plainly, "the only thing I wanted the whole day was when the warrior crouched all the way down in the wood to put his face level with mine, and when your grandson sat on my bed, which he wasn't supposed to, and when the broad one in the car park said I wouldn't be able to get rid of him. I didn't want the vaults. I don't understand the vaults. I wanted," his voice did the thing it had not done all day and caught, "I wanted the part where someone came down to my level instead of latching the door. That's the only thing I've ever wanted, and I didn't know it had a name until today when you all kept giving it to me by accident while you were busy giving me gold." Becketh of Gornuk stood in the doorway, and for a long moment the eldest of the line, who had voted the hard vote without warmth, did not say anything at all. Then she crossed the white room, closing the distance she would not have closed on a stranger, and she sat on the edge of the boy's bed, which an elder of a directing line did not do, sit on the bed of a wan child just as her grandson had done, and she did it for the same reason which she now understood, having reckoned it with her own 2 eyes. "My grandson sat on your bed," she said, "and claimed you kin in debt, and made a law the rolls have no line for, and I thought him a sentimental child." Her black eyes were fierce and wet in the lamplight. "I was wrong, and I am too old to be too proud to say it. He saw in an hour what it took me a vote and a journey down 1,000 stairs to see. You did not come into our oath to take, Harry Potter. You came into it starving for the one thing the wand folk would not give you and we give away for free, to every child under the mountain, without thinking it a gift at all, because to us it is as ordinary as iron, that when a child is frightened in the dark, someone comes down to his level instead of latching the door." She put her old hand on the boy's head, as Bargrok had in the wood. "So here is what the eldest of the Gornuk line will take in return for a nation's gold, since you do not know how to want it. I will take you for kin, as my grandson has, in the iron way, which is the only way I have. You saved the heir of my line. You will be of my line in everything the rolls cannot say and everything they can. You will have a grandmother, manling, whether you know how to want one or not, and a brother, and a blade warden who crouched to your level, and a reckoner who came for you in the night, and a whole people who give away for free the one thing you were starved of." She rose, and her fierce old face had something in it that no roll would record. "Sleep. No door in these halls latches from the outside. None ever will again, while one of the Gornuk line draws breath. That is the first gift and the only one you wanted, and it was always free. The gold is merely how a nation of accountants says the thing it does not have the words to say. Good night, Harry, you are home." It is a strange thing for an old goblin to say to a wan child, and I have surprised myself by meaning it, and I find at my age that the things that surprise me are the only ones still worth the saying. She put out the lamp and went and left the door open on purpose, into the soft gold light of the deep places, and the boy who had been kept in a cupboard with a latch on the outside lay in the first bed that was his own, in a room whose door would never latch, in the keeping of a people who had sworn him their vaults and given him, by accident, the only thing he had ever wanted. And for the first time in his memory, Harry Potter slept the whole night through without once bracing for a sound on a stair. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Raised by the forge, the nation did not believe in gentleness as a method, and so Harry's education began the morning after the oath, before he had finished being 5. It began with Mistress Vethka, and it began with her breaking something. She came for him at an hour the deep places did not mark, because the deep places had no sun, and she was the tallest goblin Harry had yet seen, which made her exactly his own height, and her fingers were stained not with ink like Nagnok's, but with a dozen faint colors that never fully washed out, the residue of the powders and metals, awarding mistress ground for her marks. She looked at the boy in the white room without warmth and without cruelty, as a smith looks at iron before deciding whether it will take an edge. "They tell me you broke a cursebreaker's seeking spell with no wand and no schooling," she said, "twice, in a wood at 5 while being hunted." She set a flat gray stone on the table between them. On its face was carved a single mark, clean and deep, a spiral closed by a bar. "If that is true, then somewhere in you is a thing worth teaching, and somewhere in you is a thing worth fearing, and I cannot teach the one until I have measured the other. This is a ward stone. The mark holds a sound inside the stone the way a jar holds water. Do not touch it. Break it the way you broke the seeking spell. Want it to stop." Harry looked at the stone. He had not tried, since the clearing, to call the furnace on purpose. It frightened him a little how completely it had come when he was desperate, and how completely it had gone when he was safe. He did not know if it would come for a gray stone on a table. "Want it to stop," Vethka said again, and there was iron under the flatness now. You are not in danger, there is no enemy, there is only you and the mark and your will. If you can only do this when you are about to die manling, then you are not a warder. You are an accident that happened twice. The nation has not sworn its iron to an accident. Show me you are more than that, break the stone. It was the closest thing to an insult Harry had received in the deep places, and he understood, even at 5, that she had chosen it on purpose, because she had read in some file what kind of boy goes still and precise when a thing is hard. He looked at the spiral closed by a bar, and he reached for the part of him that had pinched the thread of pale light in the leaf mold, and he found it, not the whole furnace, but the needle of it, the narrow place where wanting became a tool, and he set the needle against the mark and wanted the held thing inside the stone to come loose. The mark did not break, but the stone hummed once a single confused note, and a hairline of light ran across the carved spiral and stopped. Vethka's colored fingers went still. You reached the seal, she said, and her flat voice had changed by a degree Harry would not have caught a week ago. You did not break it. You are 5 and untaught, and you reached a working seal and made it answer. Most of your kind cannot feel a ward at all until they are 13 and holding a wand, and the ones who can feel one cannot touch it without the wand to carry their will across the gap. She sat down across from him, which she had not done before. You carry your will across the gap with nothing in your hand. I have been a warding mistress for 200 years, and I have seen that in 3 people, and one of them is dead and one of them is mad, and the third is the woman teaching you, so attend to her, because she is the only person on this island who can keep you out of the first 2 roads. That was the morning Harry stopped being a thing that had happened twice and started being a student. Warding, he learned, was not the dramatic part of magic. It was the bones under the skin of it. A curse was a shout, a ward was a wall, and walls were built slowly, mark by mark, each mark a rule written into the world that the world then had to obey. Vethka taught him the marks the way a mason teaches stone, the spiral that held, the bar that bound, the fork that turned a thing aside, the closed eye that hid, the open eye that watched. She taught him that every word was a sentence in a language older than speech, and that a sloppy sentence let things through the gaps in its grammar, and that the difference between a warder and a corpse was very often a single mark set a single degree off true. She was merciless about the degree. She made him cut the same mark 100 times into soft lead until his fingers cramped, and she swept 90 of them off the table without a word because they were a degree off true, and on the day he cut 10 in a row that she did not sweep away, she did not praise him. She simply gave him a harder mark, which Harry came to understand was the only praise she had, and the only one worth wanting. He learned that he had a talent for it that frightened even her, because warding rewarded exactly the things the cupboard had ground into him: patience, stillness, the willingness to do a small correct thing 10,000 times, the refusal to be hurried into error by fear or by hope. The cupboard had made him into a tool the nation could not have built on purpose, and the nation, being a nation of accountants, recognized the value of the tool and did not waste it. By the time Harry was 6, he could set a watching ward across a doorway that would wake him if a mouse crossed it. By 7, he could lay a turning ward that bent a thrown knife a hand's breadth from his face, which Bargrok demonstrated by throwing the knife, because the nation did not believe in gentleness as a method. The Blade Warden took Harry's combat education personally, and Harry never learned whether that was because of the wood, or because Bargrok had decided the boy was his, or because the nation had simply assigned its best to its most expensive oath. He suspected all 3 and asked about none of it, because Bargrok did not answer questions about himself, and because the answer did not change the work. The work was brutal and it was honest, and Harry, to his own surprise, came to love it. The wand folk fight at a distance, Bargrok said on the first day, in the low iron hall beside the heart forge where the air still shook with heat. They stand apart and they throw light at each other, and the one with the faster word wins. It is a coward's art, and it has made them soft, and it has made them stupid, because they have forgotten the oldest truth of every fight, which is this. He stepped inside Harry's reach so fast the boy did not see him move, and the flat of a blade lay cold against Harry's throat, and Bargrok's ruined face was an inch from his. At the distance of an arm, the word is too slow. The wand folk killer who has never closed the gap does not know what to do when the gap is closed, because no one has ever closed it on him, because his own kind fight like cowards. You will learn to close the gap. You are small and you will stay small, and small is not weak, small is fast, and small is low, and small gets under the arm of the man who has never been hit by anything smaller than himself. Now, get out of the blade. Harry did not get out of the blade. He got the flat of it across his ribs instead, and went down and got up and went down again for an hour until going down stopped frightening him, which was the entire point of the hour. Bargrok taught him the close, brutal art of the forge folk, who had fought wand folk in the Goblin Wars and learned the hard way how to kill a wizard who outranged you. You did not outrange him, you outclosed him. You took the first curse on a turning ward or on the meat of your shoulder if you had to, and you spent the half-second it cost the wizard to draw breath for the second word getting inside his reach, where his wand was a stick and your blade was a blade and his fear did the rest. He taught Harry to read a stance, to find the foot that carried the weight, to move on the breath and not on the eye, because the eye lied and the breath did not. He taught him to fall and to rise and to take pain as information rather than as a verdict. And he taught him slowly across 2 years to fight as the forge folk fought, low, fast inside and without mercy, because mercy at the distance of an arm was a way of dying politely. Harry was good at it. He was better than good. He had the small, fast body Bargrok had promised, and he had the cupboard's gift, the calm that came down over him when a thing was about to hurt and stayed down while the thing happened. And above all, he had the furnace, which Vethka was teaching him to narrow to a needle, and Bargrok was teaching him to spend in the half-second that mattered. By 7, he could disarm a grown goblin warrior 1 time in 5, which was 1 time in 5 more than any human child had ever managed, and Bargrok marked each of those 5 with a grunt that Harry came to prize above any words. There came a day, near the end of Harry's 7th year, when Bargrok did not bring a practice blade to the iron hall. He brought a knife. It was a forge folk reckoning knife, the kind a goblin warrior carried his whole life and was buried with, a hand's length of dark goblin steel that drank the forge light instead of throwing it back, with a grip wound in iron wire and a single mark on the pommel that Harry could now read, because Vethka had taught him to read marks. It was the tower split by 1 line, his mark, the oath's mark. "I made this," Bargrok said. He did not hand it over yet. He held it across his scarred palms and looked at it instead of at Harry, which was as close to feeling as the Blade Warden came. Forge folk are not given their reckoning knife. They earn it, and they earn it young, and the earning is the first time the elders judge that the child will not shame the steel. No human has earned one. There is no law that says a human can. There is no law that says he cannot either, because no human has ever been close enough to the forge to try until you. His one living eye came. "You earned it 3 months ago. I have been deciding whether to be the one who breaks 1,000 years of law to put it in your hand. I have decided. I am too old to care what the rolls say, and you are the best student I have had in 90 years, and the steel knows your mark already, because your mark is the oath's mark, and the oath is in the iron." He turned the knife and held the grip toward the boy. "Take it. It is yours until you die, and it goes into the ground with you, and you do not draw it unless you mean to use it, because forged steel that is drawn for show is a shamed thing, and so is the hand that draws it. Do you understand?" "Yes," Harry said, and took the reckoning knife, and it was warm, the way the iron coin had been warm, and it sat in his hand as though his hand had been made around the absence of it. He did not thank Bargrok. He had learned that much. He met the one living eye and held it, warrior to warrior, and the old goblin looked back at the boy he had broken and built for 2 years, and something passed across the ruined face that no roll would ever record, and then Bargrok said, "Now get out of the blade," and drew, and the lesson went on, because the nation did not believe in gentleness as a method. But that night, alone in the white room, Harry held the reckoning knife to the lamp and read his own mark on the pommel, and let himself feel, for one unguarded breath, the size of the thing that had been given to him. Then he wrapped it and put it under his pillow beside the iron coin, the 2 warm things in the dark, and slept the sleep of a boy who had earned something with his own hands for the first time in his life. The reckoner's lessons were the ones Harry came to think of as the true heart of his education, because the warding kept him alive and the blade let him fight, but the reckoning was where the war would actually be won, and Nagnok never once let him forget it. "The wand folk think power is a wand," Nagnok said, in the counting room where the ledgers of the nation rose in iron-bound stacks to a ceiling lost in the dark. "It is a charming error, and we encourage it, because a people who believe power is a wand will spend 300 years perfecting the wand and never once notice the goblin holding the mortgage on their house. Power is not a wand, Harry. Power is the answer to a single question, asked of any person, any house, any ministry. What do they need and who holds it? Find that, and you do not need a wand. You need only patience and a ledger and the willingness to wait." He set a contract on the table, a long roll of wand-folk parchment dense with clauses. "Now, this is a real contract, drawn by a real wizarding solicitor for a real wizarding house to lend that house gold against its lands. There is a trap in it. The solicitor put it there for his client, and the house that signed it did not find it, and the house is now poorer by half and does not yet know why. Find the trap. You have until the lamp burns down." Harry was 6 the first time, and he did not find the trap, and the lamp burned down, and Nagnok did not comfort him. The house that signed this had grown wizards and a solicitor of its own, the reckoner said, rolling the contract closed, and they did not find it either, and they are ruined, and no one held their hand while they failed. I will not hold yours. Tomorrow there is another contract. Find the trap. And there was another contract the next day, and another, and Harry failed and failed and failed, and then, on a day he remembered all his life, he stopped failing. The trap that day was buried in a clause about the timing of repayment, a single word, quarterly in one place and quarterly in another, that meant the same thing in plain wizarding speech but did not mean the same thing under goblin contract law, which counted a quarter from the signing and a quarter year from the turning of the season, so that a debtor who read it as the season would default by 11 days against a creditor who read it as the signing and forfeit the security. Harry found it because Nagnok had drilled into him that the trap is always in the place where two laws touch and no one is watching the seam, and he put his finger on the word and looked up, and Nagnok the Reckoner did something he had never done before. He smiled with his teeth. "There," the old goblin said softly. "There it is, 6 years old, and you have found the seam that ruined a house of wizards who had 60 years and a solicitor between them. Do you understand now why the wand is the charming error? They were holding wands the whole time. Wands did not save them. A word saved me, and a word ruined them, and the word was the same word, and the only difference between the saved and the ruined was that one of them had read the contract and the others had only signed it. He took the contract back. You will read every contract. You will read the ones that bore you, and the ones that flatter you, and especially the ones that are offered to you in a hurry by someone smiling, because the smile is where the trap lives. The nation has opened its vaults to you, Harry, which means that for the rest of your life people will offer you contracts, and every one of them will have a seam, and the day you sign one without finding it is the day the oath we swore begins to die. Now, tomorrow, another contract." So Harry learned the reckoning, which was law and finance and the cold reading of human want, and he learned it better than he learned anything else, because it was the discipline that rewarded the exact shape of his mind. He learned goblin contract law, which was older and crueler and far more precise than the wand folks, where a sealed word was a binding word, and there were no second chances and no soft judges. He learned the ledgers of the nation, the vast slow rivers of gold that moved under London, while the wizards above counted their galleons by the handful. He learned what the standing credit of the nation could do, and what it could not, and how a draw against it was a debt that the nation collected from its friends as exactly as from its enemies. And he learned, above all, the thing Nagnok wanted him to learn most, that the vaults sworn to him were not a fortune but a weapon, and a weapon was only as good as the hand that aimed it, and a hand was only as good as the mind behind the eye. The constraints came clear to him in his 7th year, and they came clear, as hard truths so often did, from Nagnok. "You are not safe up there," the Reckoner said one evening, rolling closed a ledger. "I want you to understand the shape of what protects you and the shape of what does not, because a friend of the nation who mistakes the one for the other gets killed by the gap between them. On goblin ground, you are untouchable. In goblin contract, you are untouchable. The arm of the nation stands between you and your enemies, and the wand folk know it, and they will not move on you here, because the last people who moved on the nation under the mountain are cautionary till the wand folk still tell their orders." He fixed Harry with the gold spectacles. "But the moment you set foot on the surface, on their ground, under their law, you are an 8-year-old boy, and the arm of the nation is 1,000 feet below you, and their law has hooks in you that ours cannot cut. They have a thing called the trace, which sits on every wizarding child and reports their magic to the ministry until they are 17, which is why you have never once been allowed to do magic on the surface, and why you must not, because the day the trace reports a child doing a working it should not be able to do, every eye in their ministry turns to find that child. They have guardianship law, which says a wizarding child belongs to a wizarding adult, and there is a wizarding adult who has been searching for you for 2 years and has more right to you in their law than we have in ours. And they have the old wizard's blood ward, which we loosened by taking you, and which he has not stopped trying to retie." He let the lamp gutter. "You are the best protected child in Britain and the most exposed child in Britain, Harry, at the same time, and the seam between those two facts is where they will come for you. Learn the seam. It is the most important contract you will ever read, and it is written in no language, and the trap in it is the whole surface of the world." Harry sat with that and understood it and did not let it frighten him, because Nagnok had also taught him that fear was just information about a gap, and a gap could be warded. "Then I'll have to be ready to go up," he said, "before they're ready for me to come up. I'll have to come up on my terms, not theirs, with the vaults already aimed and the wards already set." He looked at the Reckoner. "That's the real lesson, isn't it? Everything you're all teaching me, it's so that when I have to walk into their world, I walk in already holding the contract, and they're the ones who haven't read it." Nagnok the Reckoner looked at the 8-year-old across the ledger for a moment, and then he rose and bowed very slightly, which he had never done and which he would not do again for years. "Yes," he said, "that is the real lesson. Good night, friend of the nation. Tomorrow, another contract." There was Krenak in all of it, and Krenak was the part the disciplines could not account for. The heir of the Gornuk line had a line to learn and a seat to grow into, and his days were as full as Harry's, but the deep places were vast and the two boys were clever, and they found the seams in their own schedules the way Harry was learning to find the seams in contracts. They met on the high galleries above the deep gate, where a goblin who knew the paths could climb to a ledge that looked down the whole drowned cathedral of the hall, the green gold candle flames falling away below them into mist, and there, with their legs over 1,000 feet of holy dark, the two of them were simply children, which neither of them was allowed to be anywhere else. Krenak taught Harry to swear in Goblin, which Vethka would have skinned them both for, and Harry taught Krenak the rules of the schoolyard, which Bargrok would have called the only useful thing the wand folk had ever built. Cranach told Harry about the Gornuk line, about the weight of being the one who would sit in the seat, about a father he barely remembered and a grandmother, Becketh, who loved him in the iron way of the forge folk, which was to say by making his life harder so the world could not. And Harry told Cranach about the cupboard, which he had told no one, not even Nagnok, because Nagnok had read it in a file and Cranach had not, and there was a difference between being known and being told. "They put you in a cupboard," Cranach said when Harry had finished, and his rough young voice had gone very flat, which Harry had learned was how a goblin held rage still. "Your own blood. Because you could do magic and they could not, and it frightened them, so they put the magic in a box under the stairs and latched it." He looked down into the mist. "Do you know what we do under the mountain to blood who treat their own as those people treated you?" "No, neither do I," Cranach said, "because it has never happened. Because we are goblins and we are greedy and we are hard and we trick the wand folk at every turn, and the one thing we do not do is put our own children in boxes." He turned and his black eyes were fierce in the green gold light. "You think you are in our debt, brother. You think the oath is the nation being generous to you. Let me tell you the secret Ragnarok will never say, because it shames the wand folk too much to put in the rolls. The nation did not swear to you only because you are brave. The nation swore to you because a child who would throw his body over a stranger after being kept in a box by his own blood is worth more than every wizard in their ministry put together, and the nation knows the value of a thing the wand folk have thrown away. They threw you away, Harry, we did not. That is the whole of it. That is the oath." He put out his arm, wrist to wrist, the kin-in-debt grip that the rolls had no line for. "Brother by the thorn bush, brother by the thorn bush," Harry said, and took his arm, and for a while the two of them sat with their legs over the holy dark and said nothing at all, which was the warmest thing either of them did all year. 60 miles north, the patient man had not been idle. It had taken Cassius Rookwood 3 years to learn what he had set out to learn in a Surrey clearing, because the goblins guarded their affairs as the goblins guarded everything, with silence and law and the willingness to ruin anyone who pried. But Rookwood was an unspeakable's nephew, and he had been raised on the discipline of the slow question, and he had asked his slow questions in the right places, of a disgraced wizard who had once held a vault and lost it, of a ministry clerk who processed goblin treaty filings and was 3 months behind on his gambling debts, of a portrait in a ruined house that remembered the old goblin wars. And slowly, clause by clause, he had assembled the shape of the thing the nation had done. "They swore the old reckoning," he told the cell in the unregistered farmhouse, and even Thorne's empty face had something in it as he said it. "The oath of iron and gold, not since the Goblin King of the 9th century. They swore the nation's vaults and the nation's arm to a child." He laid a single sheet on the table, a ministry treaty filing heavily redacted, with one phrase left uncensored because the clerk who filed it had not understood its weight. "A human child. Named in their own law as friend of the nation, the boy from the wood, the one who threw Thorne into a bank with no wand. Then we know where he is," Mulciber said, "under the mountain, which is to say know where we can reach him." "Which is to say know where we can reach him yet," Rookwood corrected, and his gray-bearded patience had a banked heat in it now that it had not had 3 years ago. "Listen to me, both of you, because this is the whole of the next 10 years. We do not move on the mountain. We are not mad, and a friend of the nation under the mountain is a wall we cannot breach, but the oath that protects him also chains him. Think. The nation has bound its vaults and its arm to a wizard child, which means that sooner or later, when he comes of age, when he claims his name, when he steps into their world, as he must, because no boy stays 1,000 feet underground forever, there will be a moment when the nation's most precious oath in 900 years is walking around on the surface in a child's body, on our ground under our law. Where the arm of the nation cannot follow without breaking every treaty they have spent centuries hiding behind." He smiled, and the smile did not reach his eyes, and it had not reached his eyes in a decade. "We are not going to fight the goblins. We are going to be patient, and we are going to build, and we are going to bleed every galleon we can into the cause while we wait. And when the boy finally comes up into the light, and he will, they always do, we are going to be the ones holding the only thing in the world the nation cannot replace. Their friend, their oath, their proof that they can be people instead of a vault with teeth." He sat back. "Break that, and you do not merely kill a child. You teach the nation that the wand folk were right all along, and the nation goes back into its mountain for another 900 years, and the world is ours again. That is the prize, gentlemen, not a boy, a lesson taught to a whole people in the only language they have ever understood." He folded the redacted filing closed. "Now, the Lestrange gold is still frozen in the Bellatrix vault, and we cannot touch it while she rots in Azkaban, but the Selwyn accounts are moving, and there is a wizarding bank front in Nocturne Alley that will launder loyalist gold for a cut and ask no questions. We will need it clean, and we will need it deep before the boy comes up. Begin." And in the deep places, 1,000 feet below and 3 years on, an 8-year-old boy who had earned a reckoning knife and could read the seam in any contract sat on a high gallery with his brother, the Thornbush, learning to be a child for 1 hour a week, while above him the patient man and the singing iron drew, mark by mark and clause by clause, toward the day the two of them would meet on the surface and discover which of them had read the world more carefully. The nation did not believe in gentleness as a method, but it believed absolutely in being ready, and it was making Harry ready, one merciless and loving lesson at a time, for a war he could not yet see, against an enemy who was 60 miles north, making himself ready too. There was a day in Harry's 7th year when Nagnok did not set him a contract to read, but a decision to make, and the difference between the two was the whole of what the Reckoner had been building toward. "You have read 300 contracts," the old goblin said, "and found the seam in all but the first dozen, and you have come to believe, I think, that the reckoning is about finding traps. It is not. Finding traps is the apprentice's half of it. Here is the master's half." He laid a single sheet on the table, and it was not a contract. It was a vault ledger, Harry's own, the standing credit of the nation open to his draw. "There is a wizarding family in Yorkshire," Nagnok said. "The abbots, old and honest and poor, who hold a parcel of land the nation has wanted for 200 years, because there is a seam of ward iron under it that the nation mines nowhere else in Britain. The abbots will not sell to goblins. Their grandfather swore an oath against it in the last war when goblins and wizards did each other harm, and the oath holds the family though the grandfather is 40 years dead. The land will come to market this season because the abbots are poor and the taxes are due, and if the nation moves on it openly, the family will burn it to spite us before they sell. You hold a draw large enough to buy it 10 times over." The gold spectacles came up. "So, here is the master's half of the reckoning, Harry, and there is no seam in it and no trap and no right answer I am hiding from you. What do you do?" Harry looked at the ledger for a long time because he understood that this was a different kind of test and that the wrong move was to be clever. "It's a trap if I make it one," he said slowly. "I could buy it through a wandfolk front, hide the nation's hand, take the land the family swore never to give to goblins, and the nation gets its ward iron and the abbots never know they sold to the thing they hate. That's the clever answer. That's the apprentice answer." He pushed the ledger back an inch. "And it's wrong, and you know it's wrong, and you're watching to see if I know it's wrong. Because a draw against the nation's credit isn't my money. It's the nation's trust, shaped like money. The day I used the nation's trust to trick an honest poor family into breaking a dead man's oath, I've taught the nation that its friend is exactly the kind of creature the wandfolk always said goblins were, and I've spent its trust to buy iron the nation could mine in a century anyway, for a price the nation should never pay, which is its own honor." He looked up. "The abbots swore an oath. The nation, of all the powers in Britain, does not break an oath, or help one be broken, or profit from the breaking. If I don't buy the land, I pay the abbot's taxes. Anonymously, through a wandfolk almsbody, no strings, no hand shown, not to win the land, but because an honest poor family shouldn't lose its home over a dead man's pride, and the nation's friend can afford to make sure it doesn't. And maybe in a generation, when an abbot child grows up in a home a stranger quietly saved, that child sells the ward iron to goblins of her own free will, because the oath against us will have one less reason to hold. Or maybe she never does, and the nation waits another century for its iron, as the nation has waited for everything, and is no poorer for having been honest." He pushed the ledger fully back across the table. "That's the master's half, isn't it? Not finding the seam, knowing which seams a friend of the nation refuses to cut, even when he can, even when it costs him the iron. The trap I was supposed to find today was the one in my own hand." Nagnok the Reckoner looked at the 7-year-old across the table and was quiet for a long moment, and then he gathered the ledger, and there was something in his ink-stained face that was almost grief and almost pride and entirely his own. "Pay the abbot's taxes," he said. "Through the almsbody, no hand shown, I will draw it up tonight." He rose. "I have taught the reckoning for 300 years, Harry, to apprentices who learned the apprentice half and stopped and called themselves masters, and went out and cut every seam they found, because no one had taught them that the master half exists. You found it yourself at 7 with no seam to find and every reason to be clever. That is the day I stopped fearing what the vaults will make of you." He paused at the door. "The nation swore its gold to you, and I confess there were nights I lay awake wondering whether we had handed a fortune to a child who would learn only to take with it. Tonight I will sleep. You have just refused to take, when taking was clever and cost nothing and no one would have known. That is the whole of what makes a friend worth the swearing. Good night, Harry. Tomorrow another contract, and this time, I think, you're ready for the ones with no traps in them at all, which are the only contracts that have ever frightened me." Ready for the nation did not mean only lessons. In Harry's 8th year it came to mean something else, and it began with Ragnok summoning him to the worn old seat for the first time since the oath. The king under the mountain received him alone in the white chamber, and the 6 other seats stood empty, and that emptiness had its own weight. "You have been 3 years under the mountain," Ragnok said. "Vethka tells me you can hold a doorway against a journeyman warder. Bargrok tells me you have earned forged steel, which he had no right to give and gave anyway, and I have chosen not to notice, because Bargrok is old and right more often than he is permitted. Nagnok tells me you found the 11-day seam in a Helmsworth contract at 6, and have not signed a flawed thing since. The pale gold eyes rested on him. You are becoming what we hoped and faster than we hoped, and that is its own danger, because a tool that is ready before its time grows impatient in the drawer. So I will tell you a thing the others have been keeping from you, because you have earned the keeping of it. You cannot live under the mountain forever. The oath did not buy you a hole to hide in. It bought you a place in the world, and a place in the world must in the end be stood in. The day will come when you go up to claim your name, to take your seat in their world, to be the friend of the nation where they can see it. Not yet, but not never. And before a thing goes up into the light, it should learn the shape of the light so that the light does not blind it. He rose, which Harry had never seen him do. Come. I will show you the scene between your two worlds with your own eyes, because Nagnok can describe a thing more precisely than any goblin alive, and a described thing is still not a seen thing, and you are the sort who must see. He took Harry up not to the surface, not yet, but to the high gallery behind the public floor of Gringotts, the great marble hall the wizards used, where a goblin who knew the paths could stand behind a screen of fretted stone and look down unseen on the world above. Harry had not seen daylight in 3 years. It came down through high windows in long dusty columns and fell on a floor of white marble, polished but not black, bright but not deep, and on the wizards. There were dozens of them, queuing at the long counters where goblin tellers weighed their gold. Harry watched them with the trained eye Nagnok and Bargrok and Vethka had built in him, and what he saw made something cold and clear settle in his chest. The wizards did not look at the tellers, they looked through them. A witch in fine robes pushed a sack of galleons across the counter and tapped her foot while a teller counted it, and never once met the teller's eyes, and spoke to him in the slow, loud voice a person uses for a servant or a dog. A wizard demanded his vault be opened and grew red in the face at the time it took, and called the teller a name Harry had heard Krenok teach him to use as a curse. And the tellers bore it, every one of them, with a flat, black-eyed patience that Harry now understood was not servility at all, but its exact opposite, the patience of a people who held the mortgage and were content to wait. You see it, Ragnok said beside him behind the screen. It was not a question. They don't see them, Harry said slowly. The wizards, they put their gold in goblin hands every day of their lives, and they don't see a single goblin. They think the counter's empty. He looked down at the witch tapping her foot. They think they're handing it to a wall. For 900 years, Ragnok said, every one of them, their kindest and their cruelest, their cleverest and their dullest, they all look through us because they were taught to before they could walk, and a thing learned that young is not a thought, it is a bone. The pale eyes did not leave the floor below. And now you understand why the nation did the expensive thing, Harry Potter, and swore 900 years of itself to a boy who threw his body over a stranger. Because down there is the whole of what we have endured, and up here, beside me, is the single creature in all their history who looked at a goblin in a wood and did not see a wall. You are the proof, child. You are the proof that it did not have to be this way. That is why they will come for you in the end, the old wizard who wants you back and worse men behind him, and that is why we will not let them have you. They threw away the one wizard who could see us. We are not going to let them pretend they did not. He turned from the screen. Look your fill, then come down. There's a world up here you will have to walk in one day, and it does not love what you are, and it does not yet know that you exist, and both of those facts are gifts for now. Learn the shape of the light, Harry, and then come back into the dark, and we will make you ready to stand in it. Harry looked his fill. He watched the columns of daylight move across the marble while the queue shuffled and the tellers weighed and the wizards looked through the wall, and somewhere in the cold, clear settling of his chest, a resolve set that had nothing of a child in it. That when he finally walked down onto that bright marble floor, in a body they could see, with a name they would have to say, not one of them would ever again look at the nation and see a wall. Then he went back down into the dark, to his lessons and his brother and the 2 warm things under his pillow, and the slow, merciless, loving work of being made ready, while 1,000 feet above him the daylight moved on across the marble, and the wizards counted their gold into goblin hands, and did not know that the proof of everything they had thrown away was learning, in the deep places beneath their feet, exactly how to make them see. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The establishment notices the blood ward at Privet Drive failed completely on a Tuesday in the autumn of Harry's 8th year, and Albus Dumbledore felt it go from 300 miles away, the silver instrument on the spindle-legged table giving one last troubled puff of gray smoke before its glass cracked clean across and went still. He sat with it for a long time before he did anything, because doing the wrong thing quickly was how clever men lost games to patient ones, and Albus Dumbledore had not survived 90 years of clever men by being hasty. But he had also not survived them by being slow when the board demanded speed, and a cracked blood ward demanded speed, because it meant the keystone of his protection of the boy was gone and had been failing for 3 years, and he had let it fail by trusting an instrument over his own eyes. He went to Surrey himself under a charm that turned the eye aside, and he stood in the street outside number 4 and looked at the house, and he knew before he knocked that the boy was not in it. A house that holds a child has a particular quality, a warmth in the wards however thin, and number 4 had the cold blank feeling of a house that had expelled something and sealed the wound. He knocked anyway. Petunia Dursley opened the door and went the color of old paper at the sight of him, and the conversation that followed told Albus Dumbledore everything and nothing. The boy was gone, had been gone 3 years. Vanished in the night from the cupboard under the stairs, and Dumbledore's jaw tightened at the word cupboard, because he had placed the boy here for love's protection, and had not once thought to ask what kind of love it was, and the Dursleys had told no one, because telling someone would have meant explaining the boy, and the Dursleys had spent 11 years not explaining the boy, and 3 more not missing him. "We thought your lot took him," Petunia said, and there was fear in it, and under the fear a thing that turned Dumbledore's stomach, which was relief. "We thought you'd come and got him back. Good riddance, I said, you said," Dumbledore repeated very quietly, and Petunia Dursley stopped talking, because some old instinct told her she stood at the edge of something that could end her, and she was right, and only 90 years of discipline kept the old wizard's wand in his sleeve. He turned away from the door without another word. He had what he needed, which was the shape of his own failure. He had left Lily's son in a house that latched him in a cupboard, and a power he had not anticipated had reached into that cupboard and taken the boy, and he did not know which power, and the not knowing was the worst thing of all. It took him a month to learn, because the power that had taken Harry Potter was the one power in Britain that did not answer questions, gossip, or fear the name of Albus Dumbledore. But Dumbledore was the chief warlock of the Wizengamot and the supreme mugwump of the International Confederation, and he had read, decades ago, in a treatise on magical law that few wizards alive had finished, the particulars of a thing called the Old Reckoning, and when his quiet inquiries kept returning the same impossible word, Gringotts, he went to the old treatise and read it again and sat very still. A child. The goblins had taken a wizard child, and not as a hostage, not as a ransom, not as leverage. The pattern of his inquiries pointed only one way, and the way was so far outside the rules of the game as Dumbledore had played it for 90 years that he had to read the treatise a third time to believe the board could hold the peace. They had sworn to the boy, the oath of iron and gold. The Goblin Nation had taken Harry Potter under the mountain and made him a friend of the nation, and in doing so had placed the keystone of Dumbledore's every plan. The boy raised, humble and protected and ready, who would one day be guided to the sacrifice the prophecy required, behind a wall that no wizard had breached in 900 years. "Oh, Harry," Albus Dumbledore said to the empty office, and there was grief in it, real grief, because he had loved the idea of the boy even as he had planned the boy's life, and the two things had never seemed to him to be in conflict. "What have they made of you down there in the dark?" He did not yet understand that the question had an answer, and that the answer would in time walk up out of the dark and into his office and decline to be made into anything at all. The Ministry learned it later than Dumbledore and understood it less, which was the natural order of things. It came to them not through wisdom but through paperwork, as most things did. A goblin treaty filing crossed the desk of a junior clerk in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, an amendment to the standing Gringotts Concordat, dense and dull, and rooted for the customary rubber stamp, except that this clerk, unlike the one Rookwood had bribed, actually read the things he stamped, and one phrase stopped his quill. The amendment named a private individual as holding standing under goblin law as a friend of the nation, with the protections and immunities thereunto appurtening, and it named the individual because goblin law required the naming, and the name was Harry James Potter. The clerk took it to his supervisor. The supervisor took it to the head of the department, and the head of the department, who was an ambitious woman with a sweet voice and a cruel heart, and a deep and inherited loathing of all beings that were not human in witch or wizard, took it personally to the office of the Minister for Magic. "A wizard child," said Dolores Umbridge, laying the filing on Cornelius Fudge's desk as though it were evidence of a crime, which in her view it was, holding standing under goblin law. Immunities, Minister. "A wizard given by goblins the right to stand outside the reach of our compulsions, our summons, our trace, on the strength of some grubby underground arrangement they have not seen fit to explain to the Ministry that licenses them to exist." Her sweet voice did not rise, and that was its menace. "It is a precedent, Minister. If one wizard may take goblin standing, then any wizard may, and then where is the line between us and them? They will be voting in our Wizengamot within a generation. It must be struck down. The boy must be brought under proper authority, our authority, and the goblins reminded firmly who holds whose leash." Cornelius Fudge, who wanted very much to be told that a difficult thing was simple, looked at the filing and saw in it everything that frightened a small man in a large chair. Precedent change, the goblins doing something he did not understand, and the name Potter, which carried a weight no minister could ignore. "The Potter boy," he said, "the one who, yes, he's meant to be with Muggle relatives. Dumbledore arranged it." "Dumbledore," said Umbridge, and the name in her sweet mouth was a small act of treason she enjoyed. Arranged a great many things, minister, and the ministry has spent rather a lot of years cleaning up after his arrangements. The boy is plainly not with his relatives. The boy is by this document in the keeping of the goblins, which Dumbledore either permitted or failed to prevent, and either way it is a matter for the ministry now, not for a schoolmaster who fancies himself the boy's guardian. She leaned in and her voice went sweeter still. Send me, minister, as your senior undersecretary with a writ of guardianship and an escort. Let me go down to the bank and collect the ministry's wayward child and remind the gold grubbers that their charter exists at our pleasure. It would be a very fine thing for the ministry to be seen to do. The boy who lived, rescued from the goblins by the minister's own office. Fudge liked the sound of that. Fudge liked the sound of a great many things that wiser men would have heard the trap in, and he heard no trap in this, because Cornelius Fudge had never in his life read a contract he could get someone else to read for him. Draw up the writ, he said. And so it was arranged, by the deep slow machinery of two establishments that had each, separately, decided the boy under the mountain belonged to them, that on a grey morning in the winter of Harry's 8th year, Albus Dumbledore and Dolor's Umbridge would arrive at Gringotts within an hour of each other, neither knowing the other was coming, each intending to walk out with Harry Potter, and both about to discover that the nation had been waiting 900 years for someone to try. Nagnock came for Harry an hour before Dumbledore arrived, and he was carrying the leather case, which meant law, and he was unhurried, which meant he had known this day was coming and had prepared for it for years. Today you are tested, the reckoner said, not by me, by them. The old wizard who has searched for you for 3 years is upstairs within the hour, with a claim to you under their guardianship law, and behind him, by a coincidence that is not entirely a coincidence, comes the ministry with a writ and the same intent. They will both try to take you out of the dark today, Harry. They cannot on goblin ground by force. The arm of the nation stands between you and them, and they know it, so they will not come with force. They will come with law, and with the law they will try to build a door in our wall, a clause that says the boy must be surrendered, and they will be clever, because the old wizard is the cleverest of his kind and the woman is the most vicious, and the two clevernesses do not even know they are working the same seam. He stopped in the white corridor and turned the gold spectacles on the boy. I will be beside you. Ragnock will speak for the nation. There is a thing the nation has decided, and I argued against it and lost, and I will tell you so you are not surprised by it. The nation is going to let you speak for yourself. Harry was 8 years old. He had been 3 years in the deep places, and he could hold a doorway against a journeyman warder and read the seam in any contract and earn forged steel. But he had not once in 3 years stood in front of a grown wizard, and the wizards upstairs were the two most dangerous of their kind. He said, not afraid, calculating, if you and Ragnock can hold the wall on the law, why put me in front of it? If I say one wrong thing, because, Nagnock said, the old wizard's whole claim rests on a single premise, and the premise is that you are a child, and a child cannot choose, and a child who cannot choose must be given to a guardian, and he is the guardian. The ministry's writ rests on the same premise. Both walls stand on the same stone, that Harry Potter is a thing to be disposed of by wiser heads for his own good, and there is exactly one way to break that stone, Harry, and it is not a clause, and it is not the arm of the nation. It is you, standing in front of them and being so plainly not a thing to be disposed of that the premise collapses under its own weight. The reckoner's pale eyes were absolutely level. We can keep them from taking you by force forever. But force is a wall, and a wall can be besieged for 90 years, and I do not want you to spend 90 years behind a wall. I want them to walk out of that hall today having decided, in their own clever heads, that you are not a child to be collected but a person to be reckoned with, because a thing they have decided is far stronger than a thing we have merely forced. That is the long game, and it cannot be played by me, and it cannot be played by Ragnock, because we are goblins, and to them a goblin's word is a wall's word. It can only be played by you. So, he resumed walking toward the white chamber and the stair beyond it that went up into the grey morning light. Read the room as I taught you, find the seam as I taught you, and do not, whatever else you do, let either of them finish the sentence that begins, the child cannot. Now come. The cleverest wizard alive is waiting to underestimate you, and we must not keep him. They received Dumbledore in a chamber off the public floor that the nation kept for the rare wizard important enough to be heard and dangerous enough not to be let any deeper. A room of dark stone and a single long table, goblin ground to the inch, where the arm of the nation stood at every door in the iron of the blade guard, and Bargrock himself stood at Ragnock's shoulder, and the message of all that iron was not subtle and was not meant to be. Albus Dumbledore came in alone, in robes of deep blue, his long white beard tucked into his belt, and he was courteous, and he was warm, and he was the most dangerous thing Harry had ever stood across from, more dangerous than Thorn, because Thorn had wanted to kill him and Dumbledore wanted to save him, and Harry understood at once that the second was harder to refuse. The old wizard's eyes found Harry at the table between Ragnock and Nagnock, and they softened, and there was real feeling in them, and it was not feigned, and that was the trap. Harry, Dumbledore said, as if to a grandchild thought lost, "Oh, my dear boy, I have looked for you for a very long time." He did not sit until Ragnar gestured him to it, which was correct, and he inclined his head to the king under the mountain with a respect that was also correct, and then he folded his hands and began, gently, to take the room apart. "Director Ragnar, I will not waste the nation's time with threats it has 9 centuries of reason to ignore. I come not as chief warlock, but as a man who made a promise to a woman now dead that I would keep her son safe. I failed that promise. I placed him where he was not safe, and I did not look closely enough, and the nation found him when I did not, and for that the nation has my gratitude, which is not a small thing." His blue eyes were very kind, but gratitude does not change the law. Harry is a wizard child. By the law of the wizarding world into which he was born, a wizard child must be raised under the guardianship of a competent magical adult, and I am that adult, named in the wills of his parents, charged with his protection. Whatever arrangement the nation has made, however generous, however well meant, it cannot override the fact that this is a child, and a child cannot. "How much gold is in my line of credit?" Harry said. It was not loud. It dropped into the old wizard's sentence and stopped it dead, one word before the word Nagnak had told him not to let either of them reach, and every eye at the table came to the boy. Dumbledore blinked. "I beg your pardon, my line of credit," Harry said, looking at him steadily. "Against the standing credit of the nation. You came here knowing about the oath. You wouldn't have come otherwise. You're too careful, so you know I hold a friend of the nation's draw. I'm asking if you know the number." "Because I do, and it's larger than the entire liquid wealth of the House of Black, the House of Malfoy, and the Hogwarts endowment combined, and I can move it without your signature, or the Ministry's, or anyone's but my own and the Reckoner's countersign." He let that sit. "You were about to say a child cannot. A child cannot choose, a child cannot consent, a child cannot be left to decide a thing this large. So a guardian must decide for him. That's the whole of your claim, sir." "It rests on me being a child in the way the law means it, a person without judgment who must be decided for." He tilted his head. "I just decided something larger than your school's whole endowment before breakfast. Was it the wrong decision? Tell me where the error was, and I'll grant your premise. But if you can't find the error, if an 8-year-old just made a sounder financial judgment than the houses that have been making them for 400 years, then I'm not the child your claim needs me to be, and the claim doesn't have a stone to stand on." The chamber was silent. Bargrok at Ragnar's shoulder had gone very still, and the stillness was the stillness of a warrior watching a stroke land that he himself could not have made. Albus Dumbledore looked at the boy for a long moment, and the kindness in his blue eyes did not leave, but something behind it changed and recalibrated, and Harry saw it happen and knew he had been right about the man. That under all the warmth was a mind as cold and precise as Nagnak's, and that he had just made that mind take him seriously, which was the only victory available in the room. "That is sophistry, Harry," Dumbledore said at last, gently, "and it is very good sophistry for 8, which alarms me more than it reassures me. A child may be clever and still be a child. Cleverness is not judgment. Judgment is built of years and pain and consequence, and you have had—" He stopped, because he had been about to say "you have had none of those" to a boy raised in a cupboard and then in a forge, and he was too honest a man to finish a sentence he had just discovered was false. "You have had a great deal more than I knew," he finished instead quietly. "I see that. I've had consequence," Harry said. "I've had more consequence than most grown wizards. I just don't have it the way you expect it, so it doesn't count to you." He leaned forward. "Here's the thing you actually came to find out, sir, under the gratitude and the promise to my mother, which I believe is real. You came to find out whether the goblins broke me. Whether they've made me a weapon or a hostage or a puppet wearing a potter's face. That's the real question, and it's a fair one, and I'll answer it honestly because lying in a sworn matter would cost me my life, which is a thing your guardianship law can't say about itself." He held the old wizard's eyes. "They didn't break me, they taught me. There's a difference, and you of all people know it because you run a school, and a school is supposed to be the difference. The Dursleys had me 11 years and taught me I was nothing. The goblins had me 3 and taught me law and warding and how to read a man who's about to lie to me for my own good. I know which of those 2 is the better guardian, sir. I knew it before you walked in. The only question is whether you're honest enough to know it too." It was at that moment that the doors at the far end opened without leave, and Dolores Umbridge came in with a writ in her hand and 2 ministry men at her back, and the temperature of the room changed entirely. "Well," she said in her sweet, high voice, taking in the table, the iron, the old wizard, the boy. "Albus Dumbledore, how very like you to be here first. The Ministry will of course note that the Chief Warlock saw fit to conduct private negotiations with a non-human power for custody of the boy who lived without informing the Minister." And she did not finish that either, because Ragnar spoke, and when the king under the mountain spoke, the room had no choice but to listen. "You enter the nation's ground," Ragnar said, "uninvited with armed men, and you do not give your name. Give it or be removed. The nation's courtesy is not infinite, and you have already spent more of it than your ministry can afford." Umbridge's sweet face tightened, but she gave it. Dolor's Jane Umbridge, senior undersecretary to the Minister for Magic, bearing a writ of guardianship for the minor child Harry James Potter to be surrendered into the custody of the Ministry forthwith. She laid the writ on the table as though it settled everything. The arrangement under which you hold this child is irregular, unlicensed, and an overreach of your charter, which exists, I remind you, at the Ministry's pleasure. Surrender the boy, and the matter of your charter need not be reviewed. Nagnock the Reckoner picked up the writ. He did not read it quickly. He read it as he had taught Harry to read a contract, his ink-stained finger moving slowly down the clauses, and the chamber waited, and Umbridge's foot began, very slightly, to tap, in the exact rhythm Harry had watched the witch on the public floor tap at a teller. And Harry knew then that the Reckoner had found the seam, because Nagnock had gone still in the particular stillness of a counter who has found the 11-day error and is deciding how much to enjoy it. This writ, Nagnock said, compels the surrender of a minor child held without lawful standing. He set it down. It is void on its own terms. The boy is not held without lawful standing. He holds lawful standing of his own, friend of the nation, recorded in the Concordat, your own ministry stamped, immunities thereunto appurtening, which your Department of Magical Law Enforcement filed, sealed, and entered into force 11 days ago, under the signature of the clerk whose name is on the very amendment your office used to learn the boy existed. The gold spectacles came up. You cannot have it both ways, Undersecretary. Either the filing is valid, in which case the boy holds standing and your writ has no subject, for it commands the surrender of a child held unlawfully, and there is no such child here. Or the filing is invalid, in which case your office had no lawful knowledge of the boy's whereabouts, your writ was issued on the strength of an inadmissible document, and you are standing on the nation's ground with armed men on the authority of a paper your own ministry has just declared it cannot rely upon. He folded his hands. Choose which. The nation will accommodate either, but it will not accommodate both, and your writ requires both, and so your writ is what we call in the counting rooms a contradiction that collects itself. It is void. Take it back to your minister and tell him the seam was an 11-day filing, and that next time he sends a writ against the nation, he should send one that has read itself first. Dolor's Umbridge had gone the color of her name's worst associations. You will not lecture me on law, creature. He just did, Harry said, and you didn't catch it, which is why he could. You came down here to collect a thing, Madam Undersecretary. You should have come down here to read a thing. That was your error, and it was the same error the wizard upstairs makes about my money and you make about my custody. You all decided what I was before you got here, so none of you bothered to find out. He looked at her, 8 years old, and there was nothing of a child's fear in him, only the cold, clear attention Bargrock had drilled into a boy who fought at the distance of an arm. Go back up. Tell the minister the boy who lived is alive and well and a friend of the nation, and that the next person who comes down here with a writ and armed men to collect him as though he were lost property will find the nation considers an armed attempt to seize its sworn friend on its own ground to be exactly what the Concordat says it is. The Reckoner can read you that clause too, if you'd like. It's shorter than the writ. It only has one outcome in it. They left in the end, both of them, because there was nothing in the room they could take and a great deal they could lose by staying, and that was the whole of the victory, and Harry understood, even as it happened, that it was not a final victory but a first one. Umbridge went first. In a fury she kept behind her sweet voice, promising reviews and committees and the long attention of the ministry, and every promise was real and every promise would come, and Harry marked them, because Nagnock had taught him that an enemy's threats are a free reading of her plans. Dumbledore went last, and he went slowly, and at the door he stopped and looked back at the boy at the table, and for a moment the cleverness and the warmth in him were not at war but aligned, and what looked out of his blue eyes then was something close to grief and close to respect, and not quite either. I came to bring a lost child home, he said. I find instead a young man who is more at home than I have ever been, in a house I cannot enter, holding a strength I did not give him and cannot take away. I will not pretend that does not frighten me, Harry, because there are things in your future that I know and you do not, and I had hoped to walk beside you when they came, and I see now that I will be walking at best a little behind. He inclined his head. I will not come with writs again. It is beneath both of us. But I will say one thing, and I ask you to carry it, because it is true, and the goblins, for all their wisdom, cannot tell it to you, for it is not in their law. His voice gentled. There is a school in the north that has taught your kind for 1,000 years, and a letter will come to you on your 11th birthday, as it comes to every magical child in Britain, and on that day you will face a choice the nation cannot make for you. They have given you a fortress, Harry, and a family, and a strength. But a fortress is also a wall, and I have watched a great many brilliant young people wall themselves so thoroughly behind their strength that they forgot there was a world on the other side worth walking out into. The goblins saved you. Do not let them be the last thing that ever does. The door of the school will be open to you. I hope, when the day comes, that you will be brave enough to walk through it, not because it makes you safe, but because it does not. And he was gone into the gray morning light, leaving the sentence hanging in the dark chamber like a hook with no line, exactly as he had meant to. Ragnar watched the door close. Then he turned his pale gold eyes on Harry, and there was something in them that had not been there before the morning began. "He is more dangerous than the woman," the king under the mountain said, "by the precise amount that he is right. The woman wants to own you, and we can defeat wanting with law. He wants you to choose, and choosing cannot be defeated, only made. He has planted the school in you like a seed, and it will grow, and in 3 years you will have to reckon it." He rose. "But that is in 3 years. Today you stood in front of the cleverest wizard alive and the cruelest functionary in the ministry, and you broke their premise with your own mouth at 8 and walked them both back into the light empty-handed. Vorgen said you would break the day being our friend cost you something. Today being our friend cost you nothing and won you everything, so the test was not a true one." His worn face moved into the near smile Harry had only seen once. "But it was a good day's reckoning, friend of the nation. The establishment has noticed you. Good, let it notice. A thing that is noticed and cannot be touched is a thing that drives the careful man upstairs, and the cruel woman, and the patient man you do not yet know is counting you, slowly out of their patience. And when patience runs out, Harry, even clever men make the kind of mistake a warder can step through." He turned for the deeper dark, and Bargrok fell in at his shoulder, and Nagnok gathered the void writ to be filed against the day it would be useful. "Come, you have a contract waiting, and a brother who will want to hear how you made the chief warlock of the Wisengamot lose the thread of his own sentence. He will be insufferable about it. So I confess, Harry did a thing in the days after the confrontation that none of his mentors had set him. He asked Nagnok for the nation's file on Albus Dumbledore, and he read it as he read a contract that he expected one day to have to sign or break. The file was thick because the nation kept files on every wizard who mattered, and Dumbledore had mattered for 90 years, and Harry read it across a week in the counting room by lamplight, and what he learned did not reassure him, because the more he learned the more he respected the man, and a respected opponent is the dangerous kind. "You are studying him," Nagnok observed, finding the boy 3 nights running over the same file. "Good. Most who meet Dumbledore study how to please him or how to escape him. You study how to negotiate with him, which is the only posture that survives contact with him for long." The reckoner sat. "What have you found?" "That he's not my enemy, which makes him harder than an enemy," Harry said, not looking up. "Grindelwald, the duel of 1945. He could have ruled and chose to teach instead, which means he learned young that he couldn't trust himself with the thing he wanted most, and built his whole life around never reaching for it again. That's not a weakness, Reckoner. That's a man who has already faced the worst version of himself and won, and a man like that doesn't have the cracks you can usually count on in the powerful, the vanity, the appetite, the fear of being small. He's been small on purpose for 50 years. You can't threaten a man with smallness who chose it." He turned a page, "And he plays the long game, the longest. He left me in that cupboard for a reason. The file doesn't say what, but there's a shape to it, a protection he built around me that needed me there, and he traded my childhood for it, and I think he grieves that he did and would do it again, which is the most dangerous kind of person there is, one who will hurt you for a reason he believes in and mourn you while he does it." Harry closed the file. "He didn't come to collect me 3 years too early by accident. He came to take my measure, lost, and went away to revise. He's revising right now. And in 3 years, when the letter comes, whatever he sends won't be a writ or a summons. It'll be the one offer I can't refuse without losing something I actually want, and he'll have spent 3 years making sure of it, and I'll see the hook and take the offer anyway, because the offer will be real." He looked up at Nagnok. "So I'm going to spend the same 3 years getting ready to negotiate with him as an equal instead of a ward. He thinks he has 3 years to prepare an 11-year-old. He doesn't know the 11-year-old is preparing too. That's the only edge I'll have against him that he keeps, just slightly, underestimating how fast I learn. I'd like to keep that edge as long as I can. So this file goes back in the dark, and we never tell anyone I read it, and when he comes again I let him think he's still the only one in the room playing the long game." Nagnok the Reckoner took the file, and there was something in his ancient face that was almost worry and almost pride. "He is the most formidable creature of his kind alive," the Reckoner said, "and you have just read him more clearly at 8 than most read him at 80. I will give you the one thing the file cannot, because it is a Reckoner's judgment and not a fact." He rose. "Dumbledore's flaw is not vanity or appetite or fear. You are right that he has burned those out. His flaw is that he loves Harry fiercely and badly, and a man who loves badly will, in the end, choose the people he loves over the plan he has built every time at the worst possible moment and call it weakness and be unable to stop. He left you in the cupboard for a plan. He will break the plan for you in the end if it comes to you or the plan. I have watched him do it for others and bury the cost. That is not a lever you can pull. But it is a truth you should carry, because the day will come when the cleverest wizard alive does the unwise loving thing, and you will need to have known in advance that he is the kind who would. Now put out the lamp. You have studied your opponent enough for 1 week. Even a contract you mean to sign in 3 years can wait for morning." Krenak was waiting on the high gallery, of course, because Krenak was always waiting where the rules said he should not be, and he had heard the whole of it from a teller who had heard it from a door warden, and the air of the Gornuk line was not insufferable about Harry making the chief warlock lose the thread of his sentence. He was something better than insufferable. He was proud in the flat, fierce, hold-it-still way of the forge folk, and he showed it by saying nothing for a long while with his legs over the holy dark, and then by saying the only thing that mattered. He told you about the school, Krenak said. The old wizard, he left it in you on purpose so it would grow. Yes, and it's growing. Harry looked down into the green gold mist. Yes, he said, I can feel it. He's good. He found the one wall the nation can't build for me, and he put a door in it before he left, and he made sure I'd be the one who had to decide whether to open it. He turned the iron coin over in his fingers, the old habit. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't fright me a little. He's the first person who's tried to win me by being right instead of by being strong. I don't know yet how to ward against right. You don't ward against it, Krenak said. Bargrok would tell you. You don't ward a true strike, you move on it. He bumped his shoulder against Harry's, which was a forge folk gesture of such tenderness that he would have denied it under torture. 3 years, the old wizard said. You have 3 years before the letter comes, so spend them learning enough that when you walk through his door, if you walk through it as a friend of the nation who chose the school, and not as a lost boy the school finally caught. That's the difference, brother. He thinks the door is his. Make it yours. He stood and put out his arm, wrist to wrist. Now come down. Nagnok says there is a contract, and Bargrok says you have grown lazy, which is what Bargrok says when he is pleased, and I say you owe me the whole of the undersecretary's face when the reckoner told her the writ collected itself. All of it, do not spare the details. 300 miles north, Albus Dumbledore sat in the circular office at the top of his tower, and did not, for a long while, do anything at all, which was rare for him, and which his portraits noted with interest. He had gone to Gringotts certain of 2 things, that Harry Potter was a child to be rescued, and that he, Albus, was the man to do the rescuing. He had come back having lost both certainties to an 8-year-old's mouth, and he was honest enough and old enough to sit with the loss rather than rush to repair it. The boy had broken his premise. Not with goblin law. Dumbledore could have argued goblin law for a week, but with the one weapon Dumbledore had spent 90 years respecting above all others, which was a true thing said plainly at the moment, could not be answered. The boy had asked where the error was, and Dumbledore had not been able to find it, and a man who cannot find the error must, if he is honest, grant the premise, and Albus Dumbledore was in the places that counted honest, so he revised. He did not abandon the boy, he could not, for reasons the boy did not know and must not, yet the prophecy, the scar, the piece of soul that Dumbledore alone suspected, the war that was not over and would not stay not over forever. But he revised his method because the old method was dead. He would not take the boy, he would not be able to take the boy. He would instead do the one thing the goblins could not do and would not think to prevent. He would keep the door of the school open, and he would make certain that when the letter came, it came not as a summons but as an invitation, and that the boy who held a fortress and a family and a fortune would discover on his 11th birthday that there was one thing the nation under the mountain could not give him, and that Hogwarts could: other children. A world of his own kind to walk among, and way, and perhaps against all of Dumbledore's fears to come to love. It is not much of a lever, the old wizard admitted aloud to the dozing portraits, against iron and gold, but it is the only lever I have that does not break the boy, and I have grown rather tired in my old age of levers that break the things they move. He reached for parchment and began 3 years early to draft a letter that would not be sent for 3 years, because a letter that must do the most delicate work of a man's life should be written slowly and revised often and got exactly right. Wait for me, Harry, he murmured, dipping his quill. I am coming for you the slow way. It is the only way left that is worth coming. 60 miles from London, in the unregistered farmhouse, Cassius Rookwood read a name off a stolen sheet of ministry parchment for the first time, and went very still. The clerk in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, not the honest one who had read the filing, but the dishonest one 3 months behind on his gambling debts, had finally earned his retainer. He had brought Rookwood the unredacted Concordat Amendment, the one the senior undersecretary herself had carried to the minister, and on it, in the place the redaction had hidden for 3 years, was the name of the boy from the wood. Harry James Potter. Potter, Rookwood said, and the word came out of him slowly, as though it had a weight he had to test. The boy in the wood, the one who threw Thorn into a bank with no wand at 5 years of age, is the Potter boy, the Dark Lord's own undoing. The brat the whole of our cause has spent 13 years not speaking of. He set the parchment down with a care that frightened Mulciber more than any rage would have. Do you understand what we have been handed, gentlemen? Not a loose thread the goblins picked up, the thread, the one the ministry sings carols about. The boy who lived has been 3 years under the mountain, sworn the old reckoning, made a friend of the nation, and he came up today into the light, into the ministry's own filing, into a writ and a confrontation, which means the seam I told you to wait for has begun 3 years early to open. He looked at the empty-faced cursebreaker in the corner. Thorn, the boy who broke your seeking spell twice in a wood, is the boy the Dark Lord could not kill. Does that not interest you? It interests me, said Thorn, and his empty voice had something in it that had not been there in 13 years, which was appetite. Then we accelerate, Rookwood said. Everything I said before holds, but the clock has moved. The boy will come fully into the light within 3 years. They always come for the school. The goblins cannot stop it, and a Potter especially cannot be kept from Hogwarts without a scandal even the gold grubbers will not court. When he does, he will be on our ground, under our law, the most precious oath the nation has sworn in 900 years, walking around in an 11-year-old's body. That is the moment, but a moment is worth nothing without the means to seize it, and the means is gold, clean, deep, untraceable gold, enough to buy the people and the curses and the one breach in the nation's wall that we will need when the day comes. He turned to Mulciber, the Nocturne Bank front, Gringotts and Sons. They have been laundering loyalist gold for our cause at a cut for 3 years. Treble the flow. Move the Selwyn accounts, the Traverse reserves, every dead loyalist's frozen nut we can reach through a cousin or a forged seal. I want a war chest by the time that boy turns 11 that the nation itself would not be ashamed of, because we are going to spend it breaking the one thing the nation cannot replace. His gray-bearded patience had a banked heat in it now that 9 years had only deepened. They taught a wizard to see them. We are going to teach them in his blood what it costs to be seen. Begin. And so on the same gray day, 3 powers turned at once toward the boy under the mountain, a clever old wizard drafting a letter the slow way, a vicious ministry nursing a defeat into a grudge, and a patient murderer accelerating a decade-long plan because he had finally learned the name. None of them could touch Harry where he stood. All of them knew he could not stand there forever. 1,000 feet down on a high gallery over the holy dark, an 8-year-old boy who had just unmade the chief warlock's sentence sat with his brother by the thorn bush and told him the whole of the undersecretary's face, and did not yet know that the establishment noticing him had started a clock that would not stop until one of the 4 of them was finished. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. Goblin-backed Harry found the seam in the spring he turned 10, and he found it because he had stopped looking for it. Nagnock had set him a standing task 2 years before, dull on its face, audit the clearing flows. Every galleon in Wizarding Britain, however proudly a wizard clutched it, passed sooner or later through goblin hands because the goblins struck the coin, weighed the bullion, and held the deep vaults that were the only truly safe places in the islands to keep gold a dragon could not reach. Even the rival wizarding houses that fancied themselves bankers, the little private concerns in Nocturne and Diagon that took deposits and lent at a cut, kept their actual reserves with Gringotts under custodial contract, because a vault of one's own was a thing a clever thief could empty, and a goblin deep vault was not. So the gold of the whole island moved across the nation's books, and the nation, being a nation of accountants, recorded every grain of it, and somewhere in 2 years of that recording was the seam. And Nagnock had set a 10-year-old to find it because a 10-year-old who had been taught to read a contract had nothing better to do and might, just might, see the thing 200 years of older eyes had stopped seeing. Harry saw it on a wet evening in the counting room, 3 ledgers deep into the custodial accounts, and what he saw was a number that was the wrong shape. Gringotts and Sons, a private house in Nocturne Alley, kept a custodial reserve in the nation's deep vaults, ordinary enough, a middling sum that grew and shrank as a small bank's reserve should. Except that for 3 years it had only grown in even regular deposits, never shrinking, never lent out, never moved, which was not how a bank's reserve behaved, because a bank that does not lend its reserve makes no money on it, and a bank that makes no money does not survive, and Gringotts and Sons had not only survived but quietly prospered. A reserve that only fills and never empties is not a reserve. It is a hiding place. Someone was using a small Wizarding Bank's custodial account in the nation's own vaults to store gold they did not want anyone to count, and they were paying Gringotts a cut to ask no questions, and the gold was going in clean and sitting in the deepest, safest, most untouchable place in Britain under the nation's own protection. Harry sat with it for a long time, then he went to find the reckoner. I wondered if you would see it, Nagnock said when Harry had laid it out, and I wondered which year. 10, that is a year earlier than I would have wagered. Yes, Harry, Gringotts and Sons is laundering. The whole of Nocturne knows it in the way Nocturne knows things, which is to say no one will say it aloud. The interesting question is not that they launder. Small houses have always laundered. The interesting question is the one you have not asked yet because you do not yet have the piece that makes it ask itself. He drew a fresh ledger from a stack and opened it to a page he had plainly marked years ago. Whose gold? The page was a list of the deposits by source seal, because Goblin custodial law required every deposit to carry the seal of the house that owned it, so that the nation always knew whose gold it guarded. Harry read down the seals: Traverse, Selwyn, Rosier, Mulciber, Avery. Old pureblood houses, half of them with sons in Azkaban and the other half with sons who had talked their way out of it, and all of them names that 13 years ago had stood behind a Dark Lord, and all of them on this page, quietly feeding gold into a hiding place under London through a nocturne bank that asked no questions. This is loyalist gold, Harry said slowly. War gold, they're pooling it. Someone's building a war chest, and they're storing it in your vaults because they're the only vaults in Britain that the ministry can't seize and a thief can't crack. They're hiding it inside the one institution strong enough to protect it, which means it's protected by you, by the nation, against everyone including the people it's meant to be used against. He looked up, and something cold had come into his chest, the clear cold that came down when a thing that had been abstract turned out to have his own name in it. It's them, isn't it, the men from the wood, the ones who killed Atreth and nearly took Crenoc's hand. This is what they've been doing for 5 years while we trained. They've been building the gold to come for me, and they've been keeping it safe by hiding it inside you. Nagnok the Reckoner looked at the boy across the ledger, and his ink-stained face was very still. Yes, he said, we have known the cell survived. We did not know until you connected the seals to the source 2 years before I expected it, that they had grown this patient, or this clever, or this large. The gold in that hiding place is enough to buy a war, Harry. Enough to buy curses and men and silence, and this is the part that should frighten you, because it frightens me enough, perhaps, to buy the one thing gold should not be able to buy, which is a breach in the nation's own wall. There is no fortress that gold cannot eventually find a crack in, given enough of it and enough patience, and they have spent 5 years accumulating both. He closed the ledger. So, now you have the whole of it, a patient enemy building a war chest to come for you, and keeping it safe inside the very nation sworn to protect you, which means that every day, the nation's own deep vaults guard the gold that will pay for the attack on the nation's sworn friend. It is the kind of irony the wand folk would write a ballad about. We are accountants. We do not write ballads. We close the account. The gold spectacles came up, and there was a glint in them Harry had learned to be glad was on his side. The question, friend of the nation, is how. And I am not going to tell you because you found the seam, and the one who finds the seam earns the right to design the cut. Take a week. Bring me a plan. And Harry, he paused, bring me a plan that is legal, to the grain, under goblin law and theirs both, because we are not thieves, and a friend of the nation who solves his problems by theft is a friend who has just taught the enemy that the nation can be made to steal. Win this with law, or do not win it. Those are the only 2 doors. Harry took the week. He took it on the high gallery and in the counting room, and in the archive where the nation kept 900 years of contracts in iron-bound cases, and he took it the way Bargrock had taught him to take a fight, not by rushing the strong point, but by walking the whole line until he found the place the enemy had not warded because he did not know it was a wall. The strong point was obvious and useless. The gold was loyalist war gold plainly, and Harry could prove it was loyalist war gold, and proving it changed nothing because hoarding gold was not a crime, and the men whose seals were on the deposits had committed no offense the ministry would touch by the simple act of saving money, even saving it together, even saving it for a purpose everyone suspected and no one could name. Attack the gold for what it was, and he would lose because what it was not, in any court, illegal. So Harry stopped attacking what it was and started reading how it had got there. The custodial contract was the key, and the custodial contract was goblin paper, and goblin paper was where Harry lived. Gringotts and Sons held its reserve in the nation's vaults under the standard custodial concordat, the same one every wizarding house signed, and the standard custodial concordat had a clause in it that no wizarding house had ever once triggered in 300 years, because no wizarding house had ever been stupid enough to do the thing that triggered it, and the clause was about seals. Goblin law abhorred a false seal above almost any other thing. A seal to the nation was not decoration. It was an oath in wax, a sworn statement of true ownership, and the whole edifice of custodial banking rested on the seal being true, because the nation guarded gold by its seal and would die before it guarded gold under a seal it knew to be false. For to do so would make the nation a party to the lie, and a nation that could be made a party to a lie was a nation whose every contract was worthless. So the custodial concordat said, in a clause 300 years cold, if any gold deposited under this contract is shown to bear a false seal, a seal sworn by one who is not the true owner or sworn to conceal the true owner, then the protection of the nation is void over the entire account, not merely the false deposit, and the account is frozen in full and seized for audit until every grain in it is proven true or forfeit. Harry read the clause 4 times. Then he went to find out whether the loyalist gold had been moved under false seals. It had, of course it had. He had known it would be before he checked, because Rookwood, though Harry did not yet have the name, had a problem that all launderers had. The men whose gold he was pooling had sons in Azkaban and reputations to protect, and could not be seen to be feeding a war chest, and so the gold had not been deposited under the true seals of Travers and Selwyn and Rosier at all. It had been deposited under forged seals, cousins' seals, dead men's seals, shell house seals, the same forged seals Rookwood had ordered struck to move the gold quietly, the very precaution that had kept the ministry from tracing it. The thing that hid the gold from the ministry was a false seal. And a false seal was the one thing the nation could not forgive, and the one key that unlocked the 300-year-old clause, and froze not the false deposit but the entire account, every grain, the whole war chest in the deepest vault in Britain under the nation's own law legally to the grain. Harry sat in the archive with the cold claws and the forged seals and understood that he had found the cut. The enemy had hidden their war gold inside the nation, thinking the nation's strength would protect it. And the nation's strength would have protected it, except that to hide it from the ministry, they had been forced to lie to the nation about whose it was, and a lie to the nation about a seal was the one error the nation's entire law existed to punish. They had built their fortress inside Harry's fortress, and they had paid for the privilege with the one coin that bought a death warrant under Goblin law. He did not feel triumph exactly. He felt the clean, cold click of a contract's seam giving way under a finger set in exactly the right place, which was, he had come to understand, the only kind of triumph that did not eventually betray you. Then he started to design the plan, because finding the seam was not the same as cutting it, and between the cold claws and the frozen war chest stood a sharp wizard named Gringotts who would fight to keep his account open, a ministry that would not love the nation freezing a wizarding bank, and a patient enemy who, the moment the freeze fell, would know that the loose thread he had dismissed 9 years ago had just found and severed the artery of his entire campaign. Told Gringotts before he told the seven, because some things a brother heard first, and because this thing had Gringotts' own blood in it. They sat on the high gallery, and Harry laid it out, the hiding place, the seals, the names, the war chest pooled in the nation's own vaults to buy a war against the nation's friend, and Gringotts listened with his black eyes getting flatter and flatter, which Harry had learned over 5 years was how the heir of the Gringotts line held a rage too large to spend. Travers, Selwyn. Rosier Mulciber, Gringotts said when Harry reached the seals. Mulciber was in the wood, his voice had gone very quiet, the broad one, the one who stood bored over Atreth's body and called for them to take my hand. His seal is on this gold. He helped kill Atreth, and then he spent 5 years pooling gold to come back and finish what the green word started, and he hid it in our vaults under our protection where Atreth's own nation guards it for him. He was silent for a moment. Do you know who Atreth was, Harry, truly? I have told you he was my minder who taught me to hold a blade, and that is true, but it is not all of it. Atreth was forge folk. He had no line and no name in the rolls and no seat anyone would ever offer him, and he chose, of all the duties the nation could have given a blade with no line, to guard the children of the Gringotts seat, because a goblin with nothing of his own can still have something to protect, and Atreth made the heirs of my line his something for 40 years. He taught my father to hold a blade. He taught me. He stepped in front of the green word for me in that clearing as he would have stepped in front of it for any child he had sworn to guard, and he did it with no line to remember him and no seat to mourn him, and the rolls recorded his death in a single line because that is all a lineless blade gets in the rolls. Gringotts' flat black eyes came up. And now I learn that the men who killed him have been hiding the gold to kill you, my brother, inside the very vaults Atreth died defending the road to. So I am going to ask you one thing, and then I am going to help you do whatever you have decided, because I trust your reckoning more than I trust my own rage. He held Harry's eyes. When you cut this seam, when you freeze their gold with our law, will Atreth's name be in it anywhere? Will the rolls show that the gold the killers hid was frozen in part because one of the children Atreth died for grew up clever enough to find it? Because Atreth gets one line in the rolls, Harry, and it is the line of his death, and I have always hated that a goblin who guarded my line for 40 years gets one line. If you do this thing, I want there to be a second line. I want the rolls to show that Atreth's death bought something, that the children he stepped in front of the green word for grew up to freeze the war chest of the men who killed him. Give him a second line, that is all I ask. The rest of the reckoning is yours. Harry looked at his brother across the green gold dark, and understood that the cold financial seam he had found in 3 years of dull ledgers had, at its center, a lineless blade who had stepped in front of a killing curse for 2 children, one of whom was now going to spend everything he had been given to make that death mean something the rolls could not erase. Atreth's name goes in it, Harry said, not as a footnote, as the cause. I'll have Nagnok draw the freeze petition so that the record shows the reckoning began the day Atreth died on the surface road, and ended the day the gold of the men who killed him was frozen in the vaults he died protecting the road to. 2 lines, Gringotts, the death and what the death bought. I'll make the rolls carry both, and I'll make them carry his name where every reckoner who reads the case for the next 900 years has to read it too. He put out his arm, wrist to wrist. He stepped in front of the green word for you. I'm going to step in front of 9 years of their patience for him. Brother by the thorn bush and brother by Atreth's blade, which taught yours, which guarded the road I walked you down when I didn't know there was a road. Gringotts took his arm hard over the holy dark, and for a moment the heir of the Gringotts line, who held his rage flat because it was too large to spend, let one thing that was not rage move across his fierce young face. Brother by Atreth's blade, he said, go and find the 7, freeze their gold. and put his name in the iron, Harry, where it cannot be unwritten, because the iron does not forget, and a lineless blade who died for 2 children has waited long enough for the one thing the rolls never gave him, which is to have his death matter in a language that lasts. The plan turned on a single fact of goblin law that Nagnock confirmed for him with something close to pride. The Freeze did not wait on a tribunal. Under the custodial concordat, the protection of the nation went void the instant proof of a false seal was laid before the warden of the deep vaults, not when a tribunal ruled, not when the account holder was heard, not after appeal. The instant the proof touched the warden's hand, the account locked every grain because the nation's protection could not coexist for even one breath with a known false seal. The law made the freeze automatic precisely so that no launderer warned could empty the hiding place between the accusation and the judgment. The hearing came after. The freeze came first, and it came in the space of a single heartbeat, and it could not be undone by gold, by influence, or by the minister for magic himself. Which meant the entire campaign reduced to one problem: getting the proof of false seal into the warden's hand before Gringotts and Sons, or whoever stood behind them, knew it was coming. Because the men who had built that war chest were patient and clever and well-warned, and the moment they smelled a freeze, they would not fight it, they would run. They would draw the gold down and scatter it through a dozen smaller hiding places where no single claws could catch it, and the work of 5 years would dissolve into the dark, and the next time Harry saw that gold it would be in the shape of the curse that killed him. So there could be no petition filed in advance, no notice given, no hearing scheduled. The proof had to be assembled in secret and delivered in one stroke. And there was a complication, which Harry found as he found all complications, by checking the thing he hoped he would not have to check. In the last 6 weeks, the Gringotts reserve had begun, for the first time in 3 years, to shrink. Small draws, even regular, careful. The same patient hand that had filled the hiding place for 3 years had started 6 weeks ago to empty it. "They've started moving it," Harry told Nagnock, and laid the withdrawal figures on the table. Slowly, carefully. The way you move a thing you don't want anyone to notice is moving. 6 weeks ago. Which means either they got spooked by something, or he stopped and the cold came down and he made himself follow the thought all the way to its end, because Nagnock had taught him that the comfortable stopping place is where the trap lives, or they always meant to. They were never going to leave a war chest sitting in one place forever. They built it here because it was safe while they accumulated, and now that it's accumulated, they're distributing it to where they'll actually use it, on a schedule they set years ago. We're not racing a panic reckoner, we're racing a plan. And the plan has a head start of 6 weeks, and I don't know how long it runs, which means I don't know how much is left, which means I don't know how long I have. Nagnock the Reckoner looked at the figures and then at the boy, and for the first time in 5 years of lessons, he did not have a correction ready. "Then you have your answer to the only question that matters," the old goblin said quietly, "which is, do you move now with the proof you have and freeze what is left, or do you wait and build a perfect case, and risk that by the time it is perfect there is nothing in the vault to freeze?" He folded his hands. "I will tell you what the counting rooms teach, and then I will let you decide, because it is your seam and your cut. The counting rooms teach that a launderer's distribution accelerates near its end, because the last gold is the most dangerous to hold and the most useful to deploy. If they began 6 weeks ago, the curve is steepening now. Every day you spend perfecting the proof, the vault empties faster than it emptied the day before. You will never have a perfect case. You will only have a case that is good enough, delivered too late, or good enough, delivered in time. Choose, friend of the nation, and choose today, because tomorrow there is less to win." Harry chose in the space of 3 breaths, which was not haste. It was the calm Bargrock had drilled into a boy who fought at the distance of an arm, where the man who waited for certainty died of it. "Today," he said, "we move today. The proof is good enough, forged seals, dead men's seals, a cousin's seal sworn over a deposit the cousin's own Gringotts account shows he could never have made. It's incontrovertible on 3 deposits, and 3 is enough because the clause freezes the whole account on a single false seal, not on a majority of them. We don't need to prove all of it's dirty. We need to prove 1 grain is and freeze the rest while the hearing sorts the difference. So we take the 3 cleanest forgeries and we lay them in the warden's hand this hour before the curve steepens another day, and we let the freeze do what the law built it to do." He was already gathering the sealed proofs into the case. "I'll lose the gold that's already left. I can't help that. It left before I knew to chase it. But whatever's still in that vault locks today, and a war chest that loses its core in one stroke is a war chest the patient man has to rebuild from nothing, and rebuilding takes years, and in those years I stop being the loose thread he dismissed and start being the reason his whole campaign died in a vault he thought was safe." He looked up. "Take me to the warden now, while there's still something to freeze." The warden of the deep vaults was the oldest goblin Harry had met save Ragnock, and she did not look up from her own ledgers when the friend of the nation and the reckoner came into her stone office 1,000 feet down, because the warden did not look up for anyone, having outlasted 4 kings under the mountain and the entire careers of every wizard who had ever tried to impress her. Custodial matter, she said before either of them spoke, because she had read it in their walking. Whose account and what is the grievance? Gringotts and Sons, Harry said. False seal. I bring proof of 3 deposits sworn under seals the named owners could not have made, a dead man's, a man in Azkaban's, and a cousin's whose own account proves he never held the gold. He laid the 3 sealed proofs on the warden's desk. In the formal manner Nagnock had drilled into him, each one a sworn statement in goblin law with the contradicting Gringotts records bound to it. I lay these before the warden of the deep vaults under the custodial concordat, and I petition the freeze. The warden set down her quill. She read the first proof and the second and the third, and she read them not quickly and not slowly, but at the single unhurried pace of a creature who had read 10,000 such proofs and would not be hurried by a wizard child if the vault were burning. And Harry stood and did not fidget and did not look at his feet, because he had learned in a harder school than this one what looking at your feet taught a room. The warden read the third proof to its end. Then she rose and crossed to the wall behind her desk, where a single great seal of black iron hung on a chain of black iron, the seal of the deep vaults, and she took it down, and she pressed it to a plate of soft lead beside a brass plate engraved with the name Gringotts and Sons, and she spoke a single word in the old tongue. A sound went through the stone, not the gold bell note of the oath. A lower note, final, the sound of a thing closing that would not open at any price, and 1,000 feet of vault between the warden's office and the Gringotts reserve. A door of dragon-watched iron that had stood open for 3 years sealed itself in a single heartbeat, and every grain of gold behind it, every nut of war chest the patient man had not yet drawn down, every seal of Travers and Selwyn and Rosier, and the rest, locked, frozen, seized for audit. Beyond the reach of gold or influence or the minister for magic himself. It is done, the warden said, returning to her ledgers. The account of Gringotts and Sons is frozen in full, pending audit of every seal in it by my hand and the laws this hour. The hearing will come. The freeze will not lift before it, and it will not lift after it for any grain proven false, and any grain that cannot be proven true is forfeit to the nation as the price of lying to it. She picked up her quill. Then for the first time she looked up, and her ancient black eyes rested on the 10-year-old in front of her desk for one measuring moment. A wizard child, she said, found a false seal in 300 years of custodial accounts and brought it to me clean and sworn and incontrovertible, and froze a war chest with the nation's own law before the launderers could empty the vault. She returned to her ledgers. I have been warden for 400 years. That has not happened before. Tell Ragnock the boy is real. He will want it from me because he does not believe his own pride. Now get out of my office. Some of us are counting. Ragnock received him that evening alone in the White Chamber, and the king under the mountain had the autotroll already open on his knee, because the nation moved fast when it moved at all, and the freezing of a war chest was a thing the nation moved on. 400 years the warden has held the deep vaults, Ragnock said, and she came to me herself tonight on her own feet, which she has not done in my reign, to tell me that a wizard child of 10 found a false seal in 3 centuries of accounts and froze a war chest with our own law before the launderers could empty it. She wished me to know she did not believe it until she had read the proofs 3 times. The pale gold eyes lifted. You have made an old goblin who trusts nothing trust a thing tonight, Harry. Do not let it go to your head. Let it go instead to the place where you keep the things that frighten you, because what you did today should frighten you, and I will tell you why. Harry stood in the center of the chamber and did not fidget, because I cornered them. Because you cornered them, Ragnock agreed. You have spent 2 years learning to win without being seen, to strike from behind the wall with law from safety. It is the finest weapon the nation has, and you wield it better at 10 than wizards twice your age, and it has one flaw, and the flaw is the whole of your danger now. A man you defeat with law walks away poorer. A man you corner with law walks away with nothing left to lose, and a man with nothing left to lose is the one enemy the law cannot hold, because the law works by threatening to take from a man the things he values, and you have already taken them. The king under the mountain set the odd troll aside. You did not defeat the patient man today. You ruined him. Those are different acts with different consequences, and you must learn the difference in your bones before it is taught to you in blood. A ruined enemy does not file a contest and accept the ruling. A ruined enemy stops playing the game he is losing and overturns the table. You have spent 2 years making yourself untouchable behind a wall of gold and law. Today you gave a desperate man a reason to stop respecting walls. He let it settle. I do not say you were wrong to strike. The gold would have bought your murder. Freezing it was correct, and the timing was correct, and I would have ordered it myself if you had not seen it first. I say only this, the part of this that was a contract is finished, and the part of this that is not a contract has only now begun, and you would be a fool to celebrate the first while blind to the second. Go to Bargrock. Tell him the Reckoner's war is won and the Blade Warden's war is about to start. He will know what you mean. He has been waiting 9 years to be told it. Harry went to the Iron Hall by the Heart Forge, where Bargrock was already waiting, because Bargrock was always already waiting, and the Blade Warden had 2 practice blades in his hands instead of 1, and he tossed one to the boy without a word of greeting, which was greeting enough. Ragnarok sent you, Bargrok said. Which means you froze the gold, and which means you cornered the men, and which means the part I have been waiting for since a Surrey clearing is finally close enough to smell. The one living eye gleamed in the forge light. Good, I have grown bored teaching a strategist. Let us go back to teaching a warrior, because a strategist who has cornered a desperate man and cannot also fight is a strategist who has signed his own death warrant in very clever ink. You will not always be behind a wall, Harry. There will come a day soon now, I think, sooner than the reckoner planned, when the wall fails or the ground goes neutral or the enemy simply stops caring about the law, and on that day all your beautiful contracts will be worth precisely as much as the knife in your hand and the marks in your collar and the speed of your feet. He settled into his stance, the old killing stance of the forge folk. So, you have won a war with a contract, and I am proud of it, and I will never say so again. Now get out of the blade, manling, because the next war is coming, and it will not be polite enough to be fought on paper, and I do not intend to bury the best student I have had in 90 years because he got clever and forgot how to blade. Move. And Harry moved, and the blade rang against the blade, and the lesson went on into the deep unmeasured night, because the nation did not believe in gentleness as a method, but it believed absolutely that a friend who had just cornered a desperate enemy had better be ready, with steel as well as law, for the desperate thing that enemy would do next. Cassius Rookwood learned that his war chest had been frozen the way the powerful always learn of their first real wound, too late to stop it, and from a man too frightened to soften it. Gringotts came to the farmhouse himself, which broke every rule of their arrangement, and that breach alone told Rookwood the size of the thing before the banker opened his mouth. The man's careful nocturne composure was gone. The account was frozen in full, every seal, by the warden of the deep vaults on a finding of false seal, and there was no appeal, and there was no influence to buy, because the warden was a goblin and the freeze was goblin law, and the one power in Britain that gold could not move was the goblin nation when it had decided it had been lied to. How much, Rookwood said. He did not raise his voice. He had not raised his voice in 13 years. Of what remained, Gringotts swallowed all of it. The hearing will take months. They will prove the 3 seals false, they have already, and once 3 are false they audit all of them, and the rest cannot be proven true because the rest are not true, and what cannot be proven true is forfeit to the nation. You will not see it again. None of you will. It is gone, Rookwood. 5 years of accumulation, gone in a single afternoon, on a clause 300 years cold that no one has triggered in living memory because no one was clever enough to look for it. The banker's hands shook. Someone read the custodial concordat all the way to the cold clause and connected it to your forged seals and laid the proof before the warden in one stroke before we could draw the vault down. That is not a ministry. The ministry could not find its own seal with both hands. That is someone who lives in goblin contract law, who knew exactly where the seam was and who wanted specifically to kill your gold. And Cassius Rookwood, who had spent 9 years dismissing a loose thread, sat in the unregistered farmhouse with the ruin of 5 years' patience and understood at last and all at once exactly who had pulled it. The boy, he said softly. The Potter boy, he found the seam. For a moment something almost like admiration crossed the gray-bearded face, and it was more frightening than rage, because rage burned out and admiration did not. 10 years old. He found a 300-year-cold clause and used our own forged seals to turn the nation's protection into the nation's freeze, and he did it before we could move the gold, which means he has been counting us for longer than we knew we were being counted. He rose and crossed to the window and looked north toward a London under which a child sat on the gold that should have been his. I told you he would come up into the light, and that we would be ready when he did. I was wrong in one particular, gentleman, and a man who cannot admit the particular he was wrong and dies of it. I thought we would have time. I thought the boy would stay a child until he was a man. He will not. He is 10, and he has already cut the artery of a campaign 9 years in the building with law without leaving his fortress, without once exposing himself to a single curse. He turned back, and the banked heat in him had become something colder and more final. We cannot outwait him. Every year we wait, he grows, and he counts, and he cuts. The patient game is his game now. He is better at it than we are. He proved that today, and a man who keeps playing the game his enemy is winning is not patient. He is merely slow to lose. So we change the game. We stop building because he will only freeze what we build. We stop hiding because he sees into every place we hide. We do the one thing the patient man swore never to do, because it is the one thing his patience cannot answer. He let it fall into the room. We go loud. We stop trying to come for him on the day he is weakest, and we come for him before he is ready, while he still thinks the law is a wall thick enough to live behind. Find me the crack in the mountain, Thorn. There's always a crack. Gold could not buy it. Perhaps blood can. Begin. In the wizarding world above, the freeze of Gringotts and Sons was a 9-day wonder, reported in the Prophet as a goblin overreach against a respectable wizarding house, then quietly unreported when the respectable house turned out to have been laundering loyalist gold under forged seals, which was the kind of story the Prophet preferred to let drown. But in the rooms where power actually sat, the story was read more carefully, and read the same way in 2 of them. Dumbledore read it in his tower and set the paper down and said nothing for a while, and then permitted himself a single dry observation to the dozing portraits. He has begun to use it. The fortune, the law, the whole of what they gave him, he has stopped defending with it and started cutting with it at 10 against the very men who came for him at 5. They have raised a strategist down there in the dark, not a hostage. He steepled his fingers. I had feared they would make him hard. I find I am more afraid that they have made him effective. A hard boy I could have softened with kindness, an effective one I can only hope to deserve. He drew his unsent letter toward him, the one 3 years in the writing, and revised a line and made it warmer, and made it truer, because the boy it was meant for had just demonstrated that he could not be flattered, only respected, and a letter that hoped to reach him would have to be written by a man willing to be honest with a child who was plainly his equal in everything but years. And Dolor's Umbridge read it in the ministry, and her sweet face did not move, and behind it a grudge that had been merely vicious became something with a plan in it. The boy had not only escaped her writ. The boy had now used goblin law to freeze a wizarding bank, which meant the precedent she had feared was no longer a precedent but a weapon, a wizard wielding goblin power against wizards, and that was precisely the nightmare she had warned the minister of, come true, with her own defeat written into its origin. She began that evening to draft the first of the bills that would occupy her for years, measures to limit the standing a wizard might hold under non-human law, to tax it, to register it, to wall it about with so much wizarding statute that the immunity became a cage. She would lose most of them. She knew she would lose most of them. But a functionary who is patient with bad law can poison a well one grain at a time, and Dolor's Umbridge had decided that if she could not collect the boy, she would spend the rest of her career making the world that held him a colder place to stand. Harry told Krennoc on the high gallery, because Harry told Krennoc everything that mattered, and the heir of the Gornock line listened to the whole of it with his legs over the holy dark and his black eyes getting fiercer by the sentence. "It froze the gold that was going to buy your own murder," Krennoc said when it was done, "with the law of the people sworn to protect you, using the lie the murderers told to that very people, and you did it at 10 without drawing your knife or leaving the mountain." He shook his head slowly. "Bargrok is going to be unbearable. He has been telling the Blade Guard for a year that his student would win his first war with a contract and not a blade, and now you have, and we will none of us hear the end of it." But the fierceness in him gentled, which it did for no one else, and he bumped his shoulder against Harry's in the Forge Folk way. "You understand what you did today, brother, not the freeze, the other thing. For 5 years you have been the boy the nation protects. Today you became the boy who protects the nation. You found a knife at the nation's own throat, gold hidden in our vaults to buy a war against our friend, and you cut it out with our own law, cleaner than any blade guard could have. Vorgin said the day would come when being our friend cost you something. It came. It cost you a year of reading 300 years of dull accounts to find one cold clause, and you paid it without being asked, to protect a people who are not your blood, against an enemy who wanted you and not us." He put out his arm, wrist to wrist. "There is not a goblin under this mountain now who calls you the one child the 7 were soft on. You spent your fortune and your law and your 2 years of lessons to guard the nation, and the nation has noticed, brother, the nation has noticed." Harry took his arm, wrist to wrist, over 1,000 feet of green gold dark. "Good," he said quietly, "because they're not going to wait any more. I froze their gold, which means I cornered them, and a cornered patient man stops being patient." He looked down into the mist, and the cold, clear settling came into his chest, the one that came when a thing that had been a year of dull ledgers turned out to have his own death written somewhere in its future. "They'll come loud now. They'll come for me or for someone I'd cross the mountain to protect, and they'll come before I'm ready, because they finally understand that if they give me time I'll only beat them with it. So we don't get to keep training forever, Krennoc. The war I've been getting ready for, it just started counting down, and I'm the one who started the clock." He turned the iron coin over in his fingers, the old habit, the warm thing in the dark. "Tell Bargrok to stop being pleased and start being ready. The next round isn't going to be fought with a contract." Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The Death Eaters returned. The crack in the mountain when Thorn found it was not in the stone. It was in the law, and it had Harry's own name on it. "The freeze can be contested," the Cursebreaker said in the unregistered farmhouse, laying a copy of the custodial concordat on the table, the same document the boy had read to its cold clause, now read by his enemies to a different end. "Gringotts has the right to dispute the finding of false seal, and here." His empty voice did not change, but his pale finger stopped on a line. "A contested custodial freeze, where a wizarding house disputes the goblin's judgment, cannot be heard in secret under the mountain. The Wandfolk's own treaty forbids it. They will not let goblins judge wizards 1,000 feet down where no wizard can witness it. So a contested freeze is heard before a joint tribunal, on neutral ground, at the threshold hall of Gringotts, where wizarding law and goblin law touch, in the open, on a set day. And the petitioner who laid the proof," Thorn looked up, "must appear to swear it in person on that neutral ground, or the freeze lifts." Cassius Rookwood was quiet for a long moment. "He has to come up," he said softly. "To keep the gold frozen to finish killing us, the boy has to walk up out of his fortress onto neutral ground, on a day we will know in advance because we will be the ones to file the contest that sets the day." Something moved across the gray-bearded face that had not moved in 13 years. The thing his whole strategy was built to avoid. He used the law to stay behind his wall and strike from safety. And the law has a clause in it that drags him out from behind the wall to defend the strike. His own weapon has a handle on our end. He rose. "File the contest. Gringotts disputes the freeze. Set the hearing as far out as the treaty allows. We will need every day to prepare, and so will they, but they will prepare to argue law, and we will prepare to do the thing no one does on the threshold of Gringotts, because everyone believes it cannot be done." He turned to the cell. "The boy will come up onto neutral ground, where the arm of the nation cannot follow without breaking the treaty that makes the ground neutral on a day of our choosing. That is the moment I promised you 9 years ago. It came by a different road than I planned. It came all the same. The nation knew it was a trap before the ink on the contest was dry." "Of course it is a trap," Nagnok said in the counting room, the filed contest on the table between them. "Gringotts has no case. The seals are false. He knows they are false. He laundered the gold himself. He is not contesting the freeze to win the freeze. He is contesting it to set a day and a place where you must appear on ground the arm of the nation cannot fully hold. The law you used to strike from safety has a clause that pulls you into the open to defend the strike, and the men whose gold you froze have read it, and they will be waiting on the threshold." He folded his hands. "So, you have 3 doors, friend of the nation, and I will set them out plainly because the choosing is yours. The first door you do not appear. The freeze lifts, Gringotts recovers the account, the war chest is theirs again, and everything you won at 10 is unwon. The second door you appear, and the nation surrounds the threshold hall with the blade guard in full array, treaty be damned, and we dare them to strike into the teeth of the nation's iron. They will not strike, the trap fails, and the Wanfolk's ministry screams for a year about goblins arming the threshold against a lawful hearing, and Umbridge gets her bill, and the standing you hold becomes the cage she has wanted to build, because we proved her right that a friend of the nation is a wizard with a goblin army. The third door, the gold spectacles, came up. You appear on neutral ground, as the law requires, with the blade guard hidden and not arrayed, treaty kept to the grain. And you let them spring the trap they have spent months building, and you and the nation are ready for it, and you finish them on the ground they chose by their own choosing in the open, where the whole of the Wanfolk's world can witness that the men who struck were unrepentant Death Eaters, and the boy who stood was a child defending a lawful hearing. Win it that way, and you do not merely defeat the cell. You make every wizard in Britain watch the nation's sworn friend be attacked by the old enemy and answer, and you turn Umbridge's nightmare into the nation's vindication." He let it settle. "The third door is the most dangerous by far. On the threshold on neutral ground, the arm of the nation is a held breath, not a wall. We can hide the blade guard near, but we cannot array them, and there will be moments, Harry, when it is you and a knife, and whatever Bargrok and Vethka have managed to build into you, against a cursebreaker who has wanted you dead since you were 5. I will not choose that door for you. I will only tell you that it is the only door that does not end with you smaller than you began." Harry looked at the filed contest for a long time. "Bargrok always says the same thing," he said at last. "You don't ward a true strike, you move on it. They built a trap that only works if I'm afraid to come up, so I come up. Third door." He stood, "but not their way. They think they're setting the ground because they filed the contest. They're not. They've chosen the threshold hall of Gringotts, which is neutral ground, which means it's half goblin ground, which means Vethka and I have months to ward every stone of it that the treaty lets us ward, and the treaty lets us ward a great deal, because a hearing hall must be warded against eavesdropping and tampering and violence by law, and there is no clause that says how strong those wards may be, or who must know they are there." For the first time, something that was almost a smile touched the boy's mouth, and it was a forgefolk thing, hard and without warmth. "They read the Concordat to find the clause that drags me into the open. They didn't read it far enough to find the clause that lets me build the open into a killing ground months before they walk into it. They're going to spring their trap inside mine, Reckoner. Tell Vethka to start cutting marks. Tell Bargrok to pick his guard. And tell Krenok," he paused, "tell Krenok nothing. He'll insist on standing on the threshold beside me, and he'll be right that it's his place, brother by the thorn bush, and I'm not going to be the one who keeps him from it. He's earned the right to choose his own door too. They had 3 months, and the nation spent them the way the nation spent everything, with patience and precision and an utter absence of wasted motion. Vethka warded the threshold hall by inches. She could not array the blade guard in the open, but she could write rules into the stone, and she wrote them, turning wards under the flagstones that would bend a curse a hand's breadth from the boy who stood on the right mark, watching wards in the pillars that would wake the hidden guard if a wand cleared a sleeve, a great closed-eye ward across the threshold itself that would seal the hall the instant violence was done inside it, so that whoever struck would find they had struck inside a box that did not open until the nation said it opened. She set them deep and she set them hidden, a mark a day for 90 days, and on the last day she walked Harry across the hall and showed him the marks no eye could see, and told him which flagstone was which rule, so that when the moment came he would fight not on bare ground but on a board he had built. Bargrok picked his guard and trained them for the one thing they would have to do, which was to be invisible until they were inevitable. And he trained Harry harder than he had ever trained him, because the Blade Warden knew what Nagnok knew, that on the threshold there would be moments of bare ground between the boy and the Cursebreaker, and in those moments no ward and no guard would matter, only what a 10-year-old had been built to do at the distance of an arm. "You will face Thorn," Bargrok said on the last night in the Iron Hall by the Heart Forge. "It will not be the others want the gold and the cause. Thorn wants you, and has since the wood, because you are the only living thing that ever broke his casting, and a curse-breaker cannot abide a thing he cannot break. So when the trap springs, the others will go for the hearing, for the reckoner, for the chaos, and Thorn will come straight for you, through all of it, and nothing will turn him, and your wards will slow him and your guard will bleed for you, but in the end there will be a moment of bare ground, you and him, knife and wand, at the distance of an arm. The one living eye held the boys. I have spent 5 years building you for that moment. You are small and fast and low, and you can take the first curse on a turning ward and close the gap in the half-second it costs him to draw breath for the second word. You can do this. I would not send you up if you could not. But hear me, Harry, because it is the last thing I will be able to teach you before the iron decides who lives." His scarred hand closed on the boy's shoulder. "Do not fight him angry. He killed Atreth, and he hunted you at 5, and he has wanted your death for half your life, and all of that will be in the room with you, and it will want to make you fast and stupid. Be cold. Be the boy under the thorn bush who shook his head and waited and did not run when the bigger boy was only looking. Win it cold or do not win it. That is the whole of the forge in the end. The blade is cold or the blade is yours no longer." Harry slept that night with the reckoning knife under his pillow beside the iron coin, the two warm things in the dark, and in the morning he dressed in goblin-cut clothes sewn with Vethka's marks too fine to see, and he took up the knife Bargrok had forged him, and he went up out of the deep places onto the threshold of Gringotts to keep a freeze, and to spring a trap inside a trap, and to meet at last at the distance of an arm the cold, pale man who had wanted him dead since he was 5 years old in a Surrey wood. Cassius Rookwood entered the threshold hall of Gringotts on the morning of the hearing with the calm of a man who had already won, and it was the calm that killed him, though he would not understand that until the iron was closing over him. He had planned it the way his uncle Augustus had taught him to plan, which was to plan the enemy's responses and not merely his own. The boy would come up to keep the freeze. The boy had to, the law required it. The goblins could not array the blade guard on neutral ground without breaking the treaty that made the ground neutral and handing the ministry the scandal of a goblin army on the threshold. So the boy would come up thinly guarded onto open ground into a public hearing where the killing curse from a witness's gallery would be done before any hidden guard could cross the hall. Rookwood had walked the geometry of it 100 times. He had measured the distance from the gallery to the petitioner's chair. He had counted the seconds. He had chosen Thorn for the killing stroke because Thorn did not miss and did not hesitate and wanted the boy more than he wanted to live, and he had positioned the other 3 to make the chaos that would cover the stroke. It was, Rookwood judged, the finest piece of work of his life, and he was right, and it did not matter at all because he had made one error, and it was the error he had warned Mulciber against 9 years before and then committed himself in the end, as clever men so often did. He had read the Concordat far enough to find the clause that dragged the boy into the open. He had not read it far enough to wonder what the boy would do with 3 months in a hall that was half goblin ground. He took his seat in the back of the gallery and watched the boy come in small, dark-haired, forged steel at his belt, and so plainly unafraid that a wiser man might have wondered why, and Rookwood felt, looking at him, the thing he had refused to feel for 9 years, which was the cold suspicion that he had misjudged the board. The boy did not look like prey. The boy looked like a host receiving guests. He crossed to the petitioner's chair and stood on a particular flagstone and stood very precisely upon it, and did not move off it, and Rookwood's eye, trained by an unspeakable, marked that the boy stood as a man stands who knows exactly where the safe ground is, and then dismissed it, because dismissing the inconvenient observation was the last luxury the patient man would ever allow himself. "He stands like he owns the stone," Thorn murmured beside him low, and there was something in the Cursebreaker's empty voice that even Rookwood had never heard, a thread of unease. "Cassius, he stands like the stone is his." "The stone is neutral ground," Rookwood said, "surveyed and sealed by the treaty. There are no goblin wards permitted on a hearing floor beyond the standard against eavesdropping. I checked the survey myself." "You checked the survey," Thorn said. "Did you check the stone?" Rookwood did not answer because Gringotts was rising to dispute the freeze, and the geometry was about to resolve, and a man who has spent 9 years and his entire fortune reaching a single moment does not, in the last seconds before it, permit himself to hear the one voice telling him the moment is a trap. He watched Gringotts speak. He watched the magistrate nod. He waited for the trigger word and his hand found his wand, and across the bright hall the boy on the particular flagstone turned his head very slightly, and looked directly at the gray-bearded man in the back of the gallery, looked at him the way one host looks at the guest who is about to do the rude thing the host has already prepared for, and Cassius Rookwood understood, in the half-second before Gringotts said the trigger word, that he had not set the ground at all. The boy had 3 months ago. Marked by hidden mark, and then Gringotts said the word, and there was no more time to understand anything, only time to die inside the understanding, which is the particular death the clever earn when they mistake a child for a thread instead of a counter and pull, and discover that the thread was attached all along to a hall they had walked into of their own free will, and sealed behind themselves with their own first curse. The threshold hall of Gringotts was bright with the daylight Harry had not stood in for 6 years, and it fell through the high windows in long columns onto the neutral flagstones, and Harry stood on the one Vethka had told him to stand on, the right mark, the turning ward humming under his boots too low for any ear, and he kept his face still and his hands loose and waited for the trap to spring. The hearing convened. A wizarding magistrate sat at the high table with 2 goblin reckoners beside him, joint tribunal, neutral ground, treaty kept to the grain. Gringotts rose to dispute the freeze and spoke for 10 minutes of seals and procedure, and the boy who had laid the proof sat and listened, and read the room as Nagnok had taught him. Read the 4 men in plain wizarding robes seated in the witnesses' gallery who had not once looked at the magistrate, read the way they had spread themselves to the 4 corners of the hall, read the gray-bearded one in the back whose face he had last seen across a Surrey clearing, older now, patient still. Watching the boy and not the bench. So Harry knew the trap was about to spring a half-second before it sprang, because he had been watching for it for 3 months and the men who sprang it had been planning it for 9 years, and the difference between watching and planning is that the watcher moves first. Gringotts reached the end of his procedural speech and said the trigger word, a name no one in the hall would have marked, and the 4 men in the gallery drew as one. The first curse was thorns, and it came for Harry green and certain, the green word that cannot be blocked, and it struck the air a hand's breadth from the boy's face and slewed sideways into a pillar, because Harry was standing on the right mark and Vethka's turning ward had written a rule into the stone that the green word, for all its certainty, had to obey. The hall erupted. The other 3 curses went for the bench, for the reckoners, for the chaos Rookwood had ordered, and met the second rule in the stone as the great closed-eye ward across the threshold slammed the hall shut, sealing every door in dragon-watched iron, locking the 4 killers inside the killing ground. The boy had spent 3 months building around the trap they thought was theirs. And out of the warded pillars came the blade guard. They had been there the whole time, hidden in the watching wards, invisible until they were inevitable, and Bargrok was at their head with the singing blade, and the threshold hall of Gringotts that had been a hearing became, in the space of 1 heartbeat, exactly what Vethka had written it to be. A box that did not open until the nation said it opened, with 4 Death Eaters inside it, and the iron of the nation rising on every side. Mulciber died first, and he died badly, because the broad, flat-faced man who had stood bored in a Surrey clearing 9 years ago had spent those 9 years getting slower while the blade guard got no slower at all, and he turned his wand toward the boy and never finished the turn, because a guard named Duroc was inside his reach before the word left his mouth, and Duroc was forge folk, and forge folk did not fight at the distance of a wand. The 4th man broke for the sealed door, and found it sealed and turned to find Krenak in front of it. The heir of the Gornuk line had insisted on the threshold, as Harry had known he would, brother by the thornbush, and he had chosen his door as Harry had chosen his, and he stood now between the 4th killer and the only exit with a knife in each hand and his black eyes very bright, and what happened between them was short and brutal and goblin. And when it was done, the 4th man was on the flagstones, and Krenak was bleeding from a shallow line across his forearm, and grinning the grin of a child who had paid a 5-year-old debt and found the paying good. And Thorn came for Harry, straight through all of it, exactly as Bargrok had said he would. Nothing turned him. A guard stepped into his path, and Thorn broke the guard's ward with a flick that showed why the nation called him Cursebreaker and not Killer, and put the guard down and came on. A turning ward bent his next curse, and he read the bend, read the mark in the stone, and stepped off the warded flagstone onto bare ground where Vethka's rules did not reach, because Thorn was the one man in the hall clever enough to fight the board instead of the boy. He came onto the bare ground between 2 columns of daylight, pale and unhurried, his wand low, and his empty eyes found Harry, and for the first time in 9 years there was something in them. "You broke my casting," Thorn said, twice. "In a wood at 5, he raised the wand. "No wards now, child, no guard, bare ground, you and me, at the distance you have spent 5 years learning, I do not doubt. Bargrok built you well." The empty voice did not rise. "He should not have bothered. I have been breaking better than you since before you were born." He cast, and it was not the green word. The green word was certain and slow, and Thorn had learned in a Surrey wood not to be certain about this child. It was a cutting curse, fast and low and aimed to maim, and Harry did the thing Bargrok had built into his bones across 5 years. He did not block it, he moved on it. He took the curse on the meat of his shoulder, a line of fire and a spray of red, and he did not stop, because the half-second the curse cost Thorn to cast was the half-second Harry had been training to spend, and he spent it closing the gap low and fast and under the wand, inside the reach where a wand was a stick and a forge folk knife was a knife. He was small, and he stayed small, and small got under the arm of the man who had never once been hit by anything smaller than himself. The reckoning knife came up under Thorn's guard, cold goblin steel that drank the daylight instead of throwing it back. And Harry was not angry. Bargrok had told him not to be angry, and Harry had spent 3 months learning to obey it. He was cold, cold as the boy under the thorn bush who shook his head and waited and did not run when the bigger boy was only looking. And the cold hand drove the cold blade home, and the cursebreaker Thorn, who had wanted this child dead for half the child's life, who had killed Atreth in a clearing and hunted 2 children through brambles and broken better than the boy since before the boy was born, looked down at the forged steel in him with an expression of vast and final surprise, because no one had ever closed the gap on him, because his own kind fought like cowards, and a thing learned that late is learned too late. He fell. Harry stood over him on the bare ground between the columns of daylight, bleeding from the shoulder, the warm knife warm with a new warmth now, and he did not feel triumph and he did not feel grief. He felt the clean cold click of a thing finished exactly where it had begun, in the meeting of a child's nerve and a killer's certainty, 9 years and a hand's breadth of warded air apart. It was Bargrok who paid for it. Of course it was Bargrok. In the last moments of the hall, when Thorn was down and the 4th man was down and only Rookwood remained, the gray-bearded, patient man who had not moved from the back of the gallery through the whole of the slaughter of his cell, did the one thing none of them had expected, because he was the only one who had never intended to win the fight. He had intended only to kill the boy, and the fight was merely the cover. He drew, calm in the ruin of everything he had built, and aimed the green word at Harry's unguarded back, off the warded mark, on bare ground. In the half-second, Harry stood over Thorn's body with his guard down and the cold draining out of him. And Bargrok, blade warden of the deep gate, who had crouched all the way down in a Surrey clearing 9 years ago to put his face level with a 5-year-old's, crossed the bare ground faster than a goblin of his years should have been able to move, and put himself between the green word and the boy. It took him in the chest. The blade warden went down, and the singing blade rang once on the flagstones and went silent, and Harry was turning too late, always too late, the way you are always too late for the thing that matters, and he saw the old warrior fall, and something in him that had been cold for 3 months went white instead. He did not cast, he had no wand. He had the furnace, the thing that had folded the air in a Surrey clearing when he was 5 and wanted a wand to stop, and he had spent 6 years learning to narrow it to a needle, and he did not narrow it now. He opened it. He wanted, with the whole white flat furnace of him, for the man who had shot Bargrok to be stopped, and the threshold hall of Gringotts, already sealed in Vethka's closed-eye ward, already humming with the marks the boy had built into every stone, answered him. And so did the nation, because Cassius Rookwood had done the one thing the oath of iron and gold was written to answer. He had struck the sworn friend of the nation, on the nation's threshold before the nation's witnesses, and the iron that held Harry's name 1,000 feet below rang the gold bell note that Harry had heard come through the trees behind a singing blade when he was 5 years old, and the note came up through the stone in the daylight in the sealed hall, vast and low and gold, and it was the sound the nation made when a thing it had sworn itself to was attacked. And it did not stop at a single blade guard or a single hall, the threshold filled with iron. Not the hidden guard, the nation, rising through every door of Gringotts that gave onto the threshold, the deep gate emptying its array onto neutral ground because the treaty that made the ground neutral had a clause of its own, the one Rookwood had not read far enough to find, that the neutrality held only so long as no blood of the nation sworn was shed upon it, and Bargrok's blood was on the flagstones, and the boy's blood was on the flagstones, and the clause had voided itself. And the ground was goblin ground now, and the arm of the nation was no longer a held breath but a wall, and the wall came down on Cassius Rookwood from every side at once. He did not run. There was nowhere to run, and he was, in his terrible way, too proud to try. He stood in the rising iron with his wand still raised over the boy he had failed to kill, and the last thing the patient man saw was the thing he had spent 9 years refusing to believe. That the nation under the mountain, which the wand folk had taught their children to see as a vault with teeth, had risen as a people for a single wizard child, because the child had once thrown his body over a stranger, and that this, and not the gold and not the law was the lesson taught to a whole people, in the only language they had ever understood. He had meant to teach the nation what it cost to be seen. The nation taught him instead, in the gold bell note and the rising iron and the closing of the last door he would ever stand before, exactly what it cost to forget that they could rise. Then the iron closed over him, and the patient man was finished, and the threshold hall of Gringotts went quiet but for the daylight, and a 10-year-old boy crossed the bloodied flagstones at a dead run and dropped to his knees beside the blade warden of the deep gate and pressed both his red hands to the old warrior's chest and said, for the first time in his life, with nothing cold left in him at all, don't you dare. You don't get to teach me cold for 3 months and then do the warmest stupid thing I've ever seen. Bargrok, Bargrok. Bargrok did not die, though it was a close-run thing, and the closeness of it was the one beat Harry let himself feel and then set down, because the blade warden would have despised a student who wept over a wound the wound's owner intended to survive. The green word that cannot be blocked had struck him a hand's breadth off the heart, turned that hand's breadth by a mark Vethka had sewn into the collar of his armor years ago against exactly such a day, because the warding mistress warded everything, including the warriors who pretended they did not need it. It should have killed him. It nearly did. The nation's healers had him for a month in the deep places, and for 3 days of that month it was not certain which way the iron would decide, and Harry sat outside the healing room those 3 days and did not go to his lessons, and no one made him, because there are debts the nation does not collect. On the 4th day Bargrok woke, and the first thing he did was demand to know whether the boy had fought Thorn cold, and the second thing he did on being told yes cold by Krenok, who had been bursting to tell it, was to grunt the grunt he gave when he was pleased, and the third thing he did was tell Harry to stop sitting outside healing rooms like a muggle and go learn something, because the nation had not spent 6 years building him to have him waste a month on a wound that was. The blade warden insisted, barely worth the bandage. Harry went in anyway once before the lessons resumed and stood by the old warrior's bed, and the two of them looked at each other, warrior to warrior, the boy who had been built and the goblin who had built him. You crossed the bare ground, Harry said. You taught me for 3 months not to do the warm, stupid thing, and then you did the warmest, stupidest thing I have ever seen. I taught you not to fight angry, Bargrok said. I did not teach you not to die for your own. Those are different lessons, and you are not ready for the second, and I hope you are 40 years older than you are now before anyone teaches it to you. The one living eye held the boy's. I crossed the ground because the iron in me has your name in it too, Manling, in a place no roll records, and an old goblin who has lived too long does not get a better death than between the green word and a child worth the building. I did not get the death. I am glad of it. But I would have taken it, and you will not argue with me about it, because I am wounded and old and right, which is 3 things you are not. Then gruffer, because he had said more than the forge folk said, you took Thorn cold on bare ground at 10 at the distance of an arm. There has never been a human who could do that. There is now. Go and be it somewhere I can sleep. Harry went. But he stopped at the door and said the thing he had learned in 3 days outside a healing room, that he had never once been able to say to anyone in 11 years of being alive, because there had never once been anyone it was true about. I'm glad you didn't get the death, he said. That's all I'm glad. And Bargrok, blade warden of the deep gate, who did not deal in such words and never would, closed his one living eye and let the boy hear him say, very low, so am I, Harry, now go. And that was the whole of it, stated once, and neither of them ever said it again, and neither of them ever needed to. The wizarding world above did not get to drown this story, because this story happened in the daylight, on the threshold of Gringotts, before a joint tribunal, with a wizarding magistrate at the bench. What the magistrate witnessed and could not unwitness, and was required by his own oath to enter into the record, was this: that 4 unrepentant Death Eaters, men whose names were on the rolls of the last war, had sprung an armed ambush in a lawful hearing with the killing curse against a 10-year-old child, and that the child was Harry Potter, the boy who lived, returned from 6 years no one could account for, and that the men had struck him because he was the sworn friend of the Goblin Nation, and that the Goblin Nation had risen as a people in his defense and had finished the men where they stood. It was not a story the ministry could shape. It had a magistrate's seal on it, and it ran in the Prophet under a headline that Dolar's Umbridge read 3 times and then sat very still over, because every word of it was the exact opposite of the world she had spent 2 years trying to build. Boy who lived, ward of Goblin Nation, survives Death Eater ambush, Gringotts rises in his defense. She had wanted Britain to see a wizard-wielding goblin power as a danger. Britain saw instead the old enemy striking a child, and the goblins, the gold grubbers, the not-quite people, the wall everyone looked through, rising as people to shield him. The bill she had drafted to cage the standing he held died in committee within the month, because no member of the Wisengamot wished to be recorded voting to weaken the protection that had just visibly in the daylight saved the life of the boy who lived from the men who had murdered his parents. Functionary had been patient with bad law. The law had run this once the other way, and it had run because a wounded blade warden and a cold-handed child had given it a story it could not bend. Far north, Albus Dumbledore read the same headline and set the paper down and was quiet for a long while, and then he did a thing his portraits had never seen him do over a newspaper. He bowed his head. They rose for him, the old wizard said softly. A whole people in the daylight for one child. I have spent 90 years trying to teach our world that the beings we look through are people, and I have moved it perhaps an inch. He moved it a mile in an afternoon by being worth dying for to a goblin. He was quiet again. I plan to give that boy to a war. I begin to suspect the boy is going to make the war give an account of itself instead. He drew the unsent letter toward him, the one now nearly 3 years in the writing, nearly ready, the 11th birthday nearly come, and he read it over once more and changed not a word, because the boy it was meant for had just shown the whole island exactly who he was, and the letter, at last, was honest enough to be sent to him. The freeze stood. With Rookwood finished and the cell destroyed and the false seals proven in the daylight, the contest collapsed, and the war chest the patient man had spent 5 years accumulating was forfeit in full to the nation as the price of the lie, and the gold that had been gathered to buy Harry's murder passed, by goblin law, into the vaults of the people Harry had thrown his body over at 5 years old. There was an irony in it the wand folk would have made a ballad of. The nation did not make ballads. It made an entry in the rolls, and the entry was clean, and it closed the account. Harry stood on the high gallery that night with Cranach, both of them bandaged, the threshold hall scrubbed clean 1,000 feet below them, and for a while neither of them said anything because they were two children and the day had been very large, and they had been two children when the day was very large before, and it had ended the same way, with an arm put out, wrist to wrist, over the holy dark. "Brother by the thorn bush," Cranach said. "Brother by the thorn bush," Harry said, and took his arm. "It's over," Cranach said. "The cell, the patient man, 9 years of it, and it's over, and you're alive, and Bargrock's alive, and the gold that was going to kill you is in our vaults instead." He looked sideways at his brother. "So why do you have the face you get when a contract still has a seam in it?" Harry turned the iron coin over in his fingers, the old habit, the warm thing in the dark. "'Cause it's not over," he said. "Rookwood's finished and his cell's finished, but he told me something true in the wood 9 years ago before he knew I'd remember it. He said the Dark Lord didn't die at Godric's Hollow." He looked down into the green gold mist. "Everyone in their world says he did. Rookwood spent his whole life and his whole fortune on the bet that he didn't, and Rookwood was the cleverest enemy I've ever faced, and clever men don't bet everything on a corpse, so it's not over. It's just the end of the part I can see." He closed his fist over the coin. "And in a few weeks I turn 11 and a letter's going to come, and the old wizard's going to open the door he put in me 3 years ago, and I'm going to have to decide whether to walk through it into a school in the north, full of their children in their world where the part I can't see yet is waiting." He almost smiled, the forge folk thing, hard and ready. "Bargrock says you don't ward a true strike, you move on it. So I think I'm going to walk through the door, Cranach, not because it's safe, because it isn't. And because when whatever Rookwood was really afraid of finally comes up into the light, I'd rather meet it as a friend of the nation who chose the open ground than as a boy who stayed behind a wall, however good the wall, until the open ground came for him anyway." Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Friend of the Nation. The letter came on the last day of July, on the morning of Harry's 11th birthday, and it came in a way that told Harry as much about its sender as its contents did. It did not come by owl to cupboard in Surrey, because the sender knew there was no longer a boy in the cupboard in Surrey. It did not come by ministry courier, because the sender knew the ministry's courier would not be let past the deep gate. It came as a single sheet of heavy parchment, addressed in green ink to Mr. H. Potter, the deep places beneath London, and it was handed across the public floor of Gringotts to a goblin teller by an old wizard in a traveling cloak who asked, with perfect courtesy, that it be carried to the boy with the sender's respects, and who then waited in the queue like any other customer to be told whether the boy would see him. Nagnach brought Harry both things at once, the letter and the news that Albus Dumbledore was standing in the queue on the public floor, having come himself alone by the front door to deliver a child's school letter by hand and ask leave to speak. He came as a customer, Harry said, turning the green-inked parchment over. Not as chief warlock, not with a writ. He stood in the queue. He looked up. He's telling me he understands the board changed. 3 years ago he came to collect me and I broke his premise. Now he's queuing on the public floor like a man asking, not taking. That's not weakness, reckoner. That's the most dangerous thing he's done yet, because there's nothing in it for me to push against. He's giving me the choice cleanly, which means if I say no, it's mine, and if I say yes, it's mine, and either way I can't blame him for it. Something that was almost admiration crossed his face. He's good. He's the best I've ever faced, and he's beating me by refusing to fight. Then do not fight him either, said Nagnach. Read him as you read a contract. He has come to offer you a thing. Find what he wants for it and what it costs, and whether the cost is worth the thing, and remember that a contract offered cleanly with no trap in it is the rarest and most suspicious document of all, because everyone has a trap, Harry, and a man who appears to have none has merely hidden his very well, or has decided for reasons of his own to deal honestly, and you must know which before you sign. The gold spectacles tilted. The 7 will want to forbid it. I will tell you that now so you are not surprised. You are 11, and the standing you hold is the most precious thing the nation has sworn in 900 years, and Dumbledore proposes to take you up out of the fortress into a school in their world, full of their children, beyond the deep gate, where the arm of the nation reaches only as far as the treaty allows and no further. Vorgin will say it is madness. Vorgin will say this is the very day he warned you of, the day being our friend costs you something, and you choose to walk away from us toward them. And the terrible thing, Harry, is that Vorgin will not be entirely wrong. He folded his hands. So before you read the wizard, read yourself. Why do you want to go? And do not give me the answer that flatters you. Give me the true one, because the 7 will ask and they will know the difference. Harry sat with the green-inked letter and the question for a while. 3 reasons, he said at last, and counted them off as Nagnock had taught him, because a thing counted was a thing understood. The first one's the one that flatters me, so I'll say it first and then set it aside. I want to see it. The school, their world, the part I've only watched through a fretted screen from a high gallery. I've spent 6 years learning their world from contracts and ledgers, and I want to stand in it. That's real, but it's not enough, and the 7 would be right to forbid me for it. He set it aside. The second one's truer. Rookwood bet everything on the Dark Lord not being dead, and Rookwood was the cleverest enemy I've faced, and whatever's coming, whatever Rookwood was really building toward, it's going to come up in their world at that school, around the boy who lived, because that's where their war left off. I can stay behind the deep gate and let it come to me, or I can go up and stand on the ground it's going to be fought on before it's fought, with my own eyes open on my own terms. Bargrok says you don't ward a true strike, you move on it. The war's a true strike. I'd rather move on it than wait behind a wall for it to find the seam. He turned the coin over. And the third one's the truest, and it's the one Vorgin won't like, and I'm going to say it to the 7 anyway, because lying to them would cost me my life, and because they deserve it true. He looked up, and his green eyes were steady. I'm going to go up into their world as the friend of the nation, openly, as what I am. I'm going to walk into a 1,000-year-old wizarding school as the boy the goblins rose for, and sit at their tables and be taught beside their children, and let every one of them see, every day for 7 years, that a wizard can hold goblin standing and goblin loyalty and goblin steel and be no less a wizard for it, that the wall they've all been taught to look through has a door in it, and I'm the door. Vorgin thinks me going up among them is the day I leave the nation. It's the opposite. It's the day I carry the nation up into the one place it's never been allowed to go, the inside of their children's heads before they're old enough to learn to look through us. He set the coin down on the green-inked parchment. The nation spent 900 years waiting to find out what it's owed when it's treated as people. I'm going to spend 7 years teaching the next generation of wizards to treat it that way from the inside where it takes. That's why I want to go, Reckoner, not to leave the nation. To finish what the oath started, Nagnock the Reckoner looked at the 11-year-old across the green-inked letter for a long moment. Then he rose and gathered the letter, and there was something in his ancient ink-stained face that Harry had seen exactly once before, on the night a 6-year-old found the 11-day seam. Come, the Reckoner said. The 7 must hear that, all of it in your own mouth, exactly as you said it to me. And then I think you have a wizard to see, who is standing in a queue on the public floor, deciding whether he has the right to hope. Let us go and find out together what it costs. The 7 heard him in the White Chamber, and it was Vorgin of the Jade Rings who spoke first when Harry had finished, because the doubt was his, and he had earned the first word. 6 years ago, Vorgin said, in the antechamber, I told a boy of 5 that the day would come when being our friend cost him something he was not willing to pay, and that on that day I would be watching to see which way he broke. I gave it to him as a gift, the truth without soft edges, because the others would only smile at him. His jade rings clicked as he tilted his head, studying the 11-year-old in the center of the chamber. The day has come. Being our friend now costs him the safest course, which is to stay behind the deep gate where the oath can hold him whole, and instead he proposes to carry himself up into their world, beyond our full reach, into the very place the next war will be fought, because the lean goblin's voice did not soften, but it changed, because he means to spend 7 years teaching their children to see us. He proposes to pay the cost of being our friend not by leaving us, as I feared, but by carrying us into the one country we have never been allowed to enter. I watched to see which way he would break. Vorgin sat back. He did not break, he aimed. I was wrong, and I said I should like to be, and I find that I am not too proud to be glad of it. I withdraw my doubt of 9 years. The friend of the nation may go up, and he may go up with my voice behind him, and the first wandfolk child who looks through a goblin in his hearing will learn, I think, exactly what a forgefolk education does to a boy's sense of who is owed respect. Something that was almost humor crossed the lean face. I almost pity them. Almost. Go, manling, carry us up. And come back at every turning of the year and tell us how it goes, because I have waited 90 years to hear that story, and I find I cannot wait 7 more for the end of it. It was Ragnock who sealed it in the worn old seat, his pale gold eyes resting on the boy the nation had sworn itself to 6 years before. The oath does not end at the deep gate, the king under the mountain said. It was never a wall to keep you in. It was a covenant to send you out carrying our iron, and you have understood that better than the 7 who swore it, which is the proof, if any were needed, that the nation did not misjudge the boy in the wood. Go up to their school, Harry Potter. Hold your standing openly. where your steel where they can see it. Draw on the vaults as a friend of the nation draws, and read every contract they offer you to the cold claws, and when the thing Rookwood was truly afraid of comes up into the light, the pale eyes did not blink, and it will come, child, for clever men do not bet their lives on a corpse, do not face it as the boy who lived, which is a name their world hung on you. Face it as the friend of the nation, which is a name you earned, and which has a people behind it, and which the iron under this mountain will answer for as long as the iron remembers, which is to say forever. He rose, which the seven had seen him do only twice in 9 years. You will always have a door in the deep places. You will always have a brother on the high gallery, and a blade warden who crossed bare ground for you, and a reckoner who taught you the seam, and a warding mistress whose marks you will carry in your collar into every danger you walk toward. You are not going up alone. You are going up as the forward edge of a nation that rose for you in the daylight. Now go and meet your wizard. He has stood in a queue for an hour, deciding whether he has earned the right to hope. Let him hope. He came the slow way, by the front door, with a child's letter in his hand. That is more than 900 years of his kind ever troubled to do. It deserves an answer. Albus Dumbledore was still in the queue when Harry came down onto the public floor, in goblin-cut clothes with forged steel at his belt and the standing of a nation at his back, 11 years old and entirely himself, and the old wizard stepped out of the line and the two of them met in a column of daylight on the white marble, under the eyes of every wizard on the floor, and for a moment neither of them said anything. You came by the front door, Harry said. I came to ask, Dumbledore said. Not to take. I learned that lesson 3 years ago from a boy of 8, and I have had 3 years to be ashamed of needing to learn it, and to be glad that I did. I have brought your letter, Harry. The door of the school is open, as I promised you it would be, and the choice is yours, as I promised you it would be, and I have come to make certain that you understood it was a true choice and not a summons, because I have spent a great deal of my life summoning young people to destinies I chose for them, and I have buried rather too many of them, and I find in my old age that I would prefer just once to walk beside one who chose his own. His blue eyes were steady and there was no twinkle in them, only the honesty Harry had pulled out of him 3 years before and that he had, it seemed, decided to keep. So I will not tell you it is safe, because it is not. I will not tell you there is nothing waiting for you in that castle, because I would be lying and you would catch me lying, and I have learned not to lie to you, which is a courtesy I extend to very few. I will only tell you that the door is open and that I hope you walk through it, and that if you do, you walk through it as yourself with everything they gave you, and I will not ask you to be one nut less than the friend of the nation you have become. I know what's waiting, Harry said, or part of it. Rook would bet everything on Voldemort not being dead. He watched the old wizard's face when he said the name plainly in the daylight on the marble floor, and he watched it not flinch, and he marked that, because a man who did not flinch at the name was a man who had already decided to fight the thing it named. You didn't flinch, so you think he's right. You think it's coming back, and you think it's coming back around me, and you've thought so for a long time, and that's the real reason you've never been able to let me go, not guardianship, not my mother's promise, though I believe those are real. You need the boy who lived where you can see him when the war restarts. He tilted his head. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't make us, in part, two men using each other. You want me in that castle because of the war that's coming. I want to be in that castle because of the war that's coming, and because of the nation, and because of a door I mean to be. We want the same thing for different reasons, and that's not friendship, headmaster, not yet, but it's something. It's an honest alignment of two people who have stopped trying to own each other. I'll take that. I'll come to your school. Something moved in the old wizard's face, grief and relief and respect all at once. On terms, Harry said before Dumbledore could answer, because Nagnok had taught him that the moment a man is glad is the moment to set the terms. I come as the friend of the nation, openly, standing intact. I keep my steel in my vaults and my council, and the nation's law over its own contracts with me, and you do not ever try to separate me from the people who raised me when you wished I'd been raised by you. I am sorted and taught and tested like any student, no more and no less, no special destiny dropped on me in a corridor without my consent. And the day you decide there is a thing about the war I need to know, you tell me plainly, as one honest party to another, and you do not manage me toward it the slow way, because I will catch you managing me, and the day I catch you is the day the alliance you're building right now on this marble floor ends. He put out his hand, not wrist to wrist. That grip was Krenok's and the nation's, and not for wizards, but the plain open hand of the wand folk offered in the daylight. Those are my terms, headmaster. Read them. Find the trap. There isn't one. I learned that from a man who queued for an hour to hand me a letter. Do we have a contract? Albus Dumbledore looked at the offered hand, and at the 11-year-old behind it, and at the goblins watching from every counter, and at the whole of the world that had changed under his feet while he was busy planning it. And the oldest and cleverest wizard in Britain took the hand of the boy he had once left in a cupboard, in a column of daylight on the white marble floor of Gringotts, before every wizard present and every goblin behind every counter. We have a contract, Harry, he said. And I will keep it to the grain because I have at last met someone who reads them. Welcome not to the school, not yet. Welcome to the longest and most honest negotiation of my very long life. I find I have been waiting for it without knowing. The door is open. Come north when you are ready. We will none of us be the same after, and I begin to think that is exactly as it should be. He went to Bargrock that night, once the seven had given their leave and the contract with Dumbledore was sealed, because the Blade Warden had earned a telling of his own, and because Harry suspected the old goblin would be the hardest to reconcile, and a thing told to its hardest doubter is a thing you have already half defended. Bargrock heard him out in the Iron Hall, leaning on the anvil he no longer pretended he did not need to lean on since the green word, and when Harry had finished the contract with Dumbledore, the terms, the choosing of the school, the Blade Warden was quiet for a long moment, and then he did not argue. You think I will tell you not to go, Bargrock said, into their world beyond my reach where I cannot cross the bare ground for you. The one living eye held the boys. I will not. I crossed the bare ground once, and it taught me a thing I was too old and too proud to have learned sooner, which is that a warden cannot guard a thing by keeping it in a box. That is what the wand folk did to you, manling. They had a thing they did not understand and could not control, and they put it in a box under the stairs and latched it and called the latching protection. I will not do to you what they did to you, even to keep you alive, because a life lived in a box is the one thing I was not built to defend, and the one thing you were not built to live. He straightened off the anvil slowly. So I will tell you instead the thing a Blade Warden tells a warrior he is sending where he cannot follow. You will be afraid up there, not of the curses. I have built you for curses. You will be afraid of the other thing, the soft thing, the thing the wandfolk children have and you did not. An ordinary childhood, friends made over nonsense, a world that does not weigh every word for the seam. You will want it, and wanting it will frighten you more than any curse breaker because you do not know how to want things, and you will be tempted to wall it out and stay the cold strategist I helped Vethka and the Reckoner make, because cold is safe and wanting is not. His scarred hand closed on the boy's shoulder. Do not wall it out, that is the order, and it is the only order I will ever give you that is not about a blade. Let them be your friends, the ones who earn it. Let the soft world in, where it earns the letting. You can be the friend of the nation and a strategist and a warrior and still be a boy who has friends, Harry. The wandfolk think those things are at war, and they are wrong, and the proof that they are wrong is that an old goblin who has nothing soft in him crossed bare ground for a child he loves, and was glad of it, and would do it again. He let go. Go up, make friends, read your contracts, wear my steel. And come back at the turning of the year and tell me you let at least one of them pass the wall, because if you come back having walled the whole castle out and kept yourself cold and safe and alone, I will consider that I built you badly, and a Blade Warden does not build badly, and I will not have you prove me wrong at the end of my life. Now, tell your brother. He will not be as wise about it as I have just been, and you will need the practice of being argued with, because the wand folk will argue with you about everything, and most of them will be wrong, and a few of them will be your friends, and learning to tell those few from the rest is the only lesson left that I cannot teach you. He bought his school things himself in Diagon Alley in the daylight, and the buying of them was the first time the wizarding world got to look at Harry Potter and discover it had no idea what it was looking at. He came up through the bank because the bank was the proper door for a friend of the nation, and he came out onto the cobbles of Diagon Alley with a goblin escort that walked a pace behind and to the left, not as servants and not as guards, but as the nation's quiet presence at the shoulder of its friend, and the alley, which had been loud, was not loud where he passed. Word had run ahead of him because the prophet had run the headline and the headline had run the alley, and so the shoppers who turned to look at the dark-haired boy with the green eyes and the scar half hidden under his fringe were not looking at a lost child or a celebrity. They did not know what they were looking at. They saw forged steel at an 11-year-old's belt, and goblins at his shoulder who answered to him, and robes cut in no fashion any of them knew, and a boy who walked their famous alley as though he had read a map of it and found it smaller than advertised, and they did not cheer and they did not crowd, because some instinct older than gossip told them that the boy who lived had come back from wherever he had been as something their world did not have a word for yet. Harry felt all of it and read all of it, and let none of it touch the cold, clear center of him, because Bargrock had built that center to hold under a cursebreaker's wand, and a crowd of shoppers was not a cursebreaker. He bought his cauldron and his scales and his files, and he bought his books from Flourish and Blots and found, opening the first of them on the counter, that he had already read better treatments of half their contents in the nation's archive, which did not disappoint him so much as confirm a thing he had suspected from 6 years of ledgers, that the wand folks' learning was wide and shallow where the nation's was narrow and deep, and that a boy who had both would be a rare thing in their castle. He paid for everything from his own draw, countersigned by the escort, in goblin-struck galleons that the shopkeepers took with a new and careful courtesy, because a shopkeeper who has read the morning's prophet handles the gold of the nation's friend rather differently than he handles the gold of a schoolboy. And he went last to Ollivander's, because a friend of the nation might carry forged steel, but a wizard at a wizarding school needed a wand, and there were some things even the deep places did not make. The shop was narrow and dim and smelled of dust and secrets, and the old man who came out of the stacks had eyes that were too pale and too knowing, and he looked at Harry for a long moment before he said a word, and what he said was not what he said to other children. I wondered, Ollivander murmured, what would walk through that door. The whole alley has wondered. They expected a hero or a victim, and they have got neither, and it has unsettled them. The pale eyes moved over the forged steel, the goblin escort, the boy. Holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, I had set aside for you, Mr. Potter, the day you were born, a brother to the wand that gave you that scar, a poet's choice, a destiny's choice. He set a long, thin box on the counter, and then, slowly, he did not open it. But you are not the boy that wand was set aside for. That boy was to be shaped by grief and a cupboard and a careful old hand, and to come to me hungry for a place to belong. You have a place to belong. You have come to me already shaped by iron, by a forge, by a people. The holly and phoenix would still answer you, it is a brother to your enemy's wand, and the two of you are bound whether you carry it or not, but it would answer you as the boy you were going to be, and you are not him, and I find I cannot, in conscience, sell a man a wand made for a stranger. He turned and went back into the stacks, and his voice came out of the dust. Let us find the wand for the boy who actually walked through my door. It will take longer, it will be worth it. The nation taught you to read a contract before you sign. Allow an old man the same courtesy with a wand, which is a longer contract than any goblin ever drew, and binds harder, and lasts your whole life. It took 2 hours, and it was, Harry thought afterward, the only genuine negotiation he had in the whole of the alley, because Ollivander was the one wizard he met who did not care in the slightest what the prophet had printed and cared enormously what the boy actually was. They went through 40 wands. The holly and phoenix sat in its box on the counter the whole time, unopened, a road not taken. And at the end of the 2 hours, when Harry's hand closed on a wand of hornbeam and dragon heartstring, 12.5 inches, unyielding, the shop did not fill with the warm gold sparks the storybooks promised. It went for a single heartbeat, very cold and very still, and a single clear note sounded, not the nation's gold bell note, but akin to it, a wand recognizing a hand that had been forged rather than found. Hornbeam chooses the committed, Ollivander said softly, rapping it. It bonds to a single purpose and will not serve a divided heart. Dragon heartstring for power, and for a temper that once decided does not turn, unyielding. He handed it across. It is not a poet's wand, Mr. Potter. It is a warder's wand and a strategist's wand, and a wand for a boy who has already decided who he is and will spend his life refusing to be anything else. The holly and phoenix would have made you the hero of someone else's story. The pale eyes glinted. This one will let you write your own. I think the goblins would approve. I think they already have. Harry paid for the wand from his own draw, and thanked the old man in the wandfolk manner, and walked out of Ollivander's into the daylight of Diagon Alley with forged steel at his belt and a hornbeam wand up his sleeve and the standing of a nation at his back, and the alley watched him go and still did not have a word for him, and Harry found, walking back toward the bank and the deep door home, that he did not mind. They would learn the word over 7 years. He was, after all, going to teach it to them. The ministry in the end did the thing the ministry always did when a fact became too large to fight. It formalized the fact and pretended it had meant to all along. With the boy who lived publicly attending Hogwarts as a sworn friend of the Goblin Nation, with a magistrate's record of the ambush and the nation's rising, with the prophet's headline still hanging over the public mood, there was no longer any question of striking the standing down. There was only the question of how the ministry would be seen to have handled it, and Cornelius Fudge, who wanted very much to be told that a difficult thing was simple, was at last told the simple thing by people cleverer than Umbridge, that a minister who formalized the standing would be remembered as the minister who secured the alliance, and a minister who fought it would be remembered as the man who tried to weaken the protection of a child the whole island had just watched the goblins save. Fudge chose to be remembered well. A treaty amendment was drafted, debated, and passed by the Wisengamot, recognizing the standing of a wizard who held it under goblin law, hedged about with enough wizarding qualification to let everyone save face, and binding enough that it could not be quietly reversed by a functionary with a grudge. Dolar's Umbridge drafted the qualifications. It was the cruelest thing the ministry could have done to her, and they did not even mean it as cruelty. They handed the bill she had meant to use as a cage to the woman who had wanted the cage, and made her write it as a charter instead, clause by clause in her own sweet looping hand, the formal recognition of everything she had spent 3 years trying to prevent. She wrote it. She had no choice. Refusing would have ended her career, and Dolar's Umbridge would have written the abolition of her own grandmother before she ended her own career. But she wrote it slowly, and she poisoned what grains she could, and Harry, who read the final amendment to its cold clauses as Nagnok had taught him, found 4 small traps in her qualifications and had Nagnok strike all 4 before the nation countersigned, and sent word back up to the senior undersecretary, through the proper channels with perfect courtesy, that the friend of the nation thanked her for her diligence, and had taken the liberty of correcting 4 clerical ambiguities in her draft, which the nation was certain she would be relieved to have caught. It was not necessary. It was, Harry admitted to Crennock later, entirely petty. He did it anyway because some lessons are best taught by being seen to have read the contract more carefully than the person who wrote it, and because Dolor's Umbridge had once stood on the nation's ground with armed men and called a goblin creature, and the nation did not forget, and neither, it turned out, did its friend. He left for the north on the 1st of September, and the deep places said goodbye in the only ways the deep places knew. Vethka sewed his school robes herself, mark by mark, 90 marks too fine for any eye, and when she put them in his hands she said only, "There is a turning ward in the collar, as there was in Bargrock's. You will not need it for a curse a hand's breadth off your heart, I hope, for a long while yet. But you will be among the wand folk, and the wand folk are careless, and a careless world throws a great many things at a boy who stands where they were taught not to look. Wear it, and cut your own marks every night before you sleep, even when you are tired, even when you are happy, especially when you are happy, because happiness is when a warder forgets the seam." It was the closest the warding mistress came to love, and Harry understood it as such, and thanked her in the goblin manner, which was to wear the robes and say nothing. Bargrock recovered, gruff, still moving a half-beat slower than before the green word and pretending not to, took Harry down to the iron hall by the Heartforge one last time and did not train him, which frightened Harry more than any drill. "I have nothing left to teach you that a drill can teach," the Blade Warden said. "The rest you will learn where I cannot follow in their world against their dangers, and some of it you will learn badly and bleed for, because that is how the last lessons are always learned. The one living eye held the boys, so I will give you no drill. I will give you only the thing I should have said on the threshold instead of crossing the bare ground like a fool, which is this: you are not the one child the 7 were soft on. You are not the boy who lived. You are a forgefolk warrior who happens to be human, built in this hall by my own hand, and you carry my steel, and when you are afraid up there in the bright, careless world, you will remember that an old goblin who had lived too long thought you were worth crossing the bare ground for, and you will stand." He put his scarred hand on the boy's shoulder one last time. "Now go, and come back at the turning of the year and spar with me, and let me see what their school has not managed to make soft. I will be slower. You will be faster. It is the right order of things. Go, Harry." And Crennock came to the high gallery where it had always been, where 2 children had learned to be children 1 hour a week over 6 years, and the 2 of them sat with their legs over the holy dark, the green-gold candle flames falling away below into the mist, and for a while neither of them said anything, because they were not children anymore, not quite, and the gallery knew it. "You'll be the only goblin's brother in 1,000 years of that school," Crennock said at last. "They won't understand it. They'll see the steel and the standing and the gold, and they'll think you're powerful, and they'll be right, but they'll have the reason wrong. They'll think the nation made you strong." He looked sideways at Harry. "It didn't. You walked into a wood at 5 and threw your body over a stranger, and that was the strong thing, and everything after was just the nation recognizing a strength it had been waiting 900 years to find. Don't let them get the reason wrong, brother. The steel isn't why you're strong. The steel is what the strong thing earned." He put out his arm, wrist to wrist, over 1,000 feet of holy dark, as he had in a white room on the night of an oath 6 years before. "Brother by the thorn bush." "Brother by the thorn bush," Harry said, and took his arm and held it, and there was nothing cold in him at all. He went up out of the deep places on the 1st of September, 11 years old, in robes sewn with marks no eye could see, with forged steel at his belt and the standing of a nation at his back, and the vaults of the mountain open to his hand and a brother's grip still warm on his wrist. And he came out onto the surface, into the careless, bright, wizarding world that had once left him in a cupboard, and now did not know what to make of him at all. He was no one's pawn. Dumbledore had a contract with him, read to the cold clause and signed in daylight, and would keep it to the grain, because he had finally met someone who would catch him if he did not. The ministry had formalized him and feared him a little and would leave him be. The patient man who had hunted him for 9 years was finished, his cell destroyed, his war chest forfeit to the people he had meant to destroy with it. And somewhere ahead, in a castle in the north, the thing Rookwood had bet his life on was waiting to come up into the light, around the boy who lived where the last war had left off, and the boy who would meet it was not a lost child to be guided to a sacrifice, not a weapon to be aimed by a careful old hand, not a hostage and not a pawn, but the sworn friend of a nation that had risen for him in the daylight and would rise for him again. Far below him, 1,000 feet down, in the heart forge of the mountain where the nation's oldest oaths were not written but made, a bar of black iron lay in its place, and on it, raised in the metal as though it had always been there, were a line of marks and a tower split by a single line, and the iron held a name, and the iron did not forget, and the iron would not forget while the mountain stood, and the name in the iron was walking north, into the open ground, into the gathering war. Into the rest of the story, carrying the whole weight of the deep places with him in a turning ward sewn into his collar, and a knife forged by a one-eyed warrior, and a credit line larger than any house in Britain, and a brother's grip still warm on his wrist. The wand folk had looked at the nation for 900 years and seen a vault with teeth. They were about to spend 7 years learning, one careless child at a time, exactly what the nation had been waiting all that while to teach them. That there had been all along a door in the wall they were taught to look through, and that the door had a name, and the name was theirs to say now whether they liked it or not, because the iron under the mountain had written it, and the iron does not forget. Harry Potter, friend of the nation, brother by the thorn bush, going north. And the oath of iron and gold went with him and would, until the iron forgot, which iron does not. Chapter 7 End.